If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. The wind howled outside my office window like a wounded animal as I stared at the blinking red dot on my computer screen. That dot wasn't supposed to be there. It meant the research station's emergency beacon had gone off, and in all my years, as a winter rescue ranger at Denali National Park, I'd never seen it activated during a storm this bad. I'm Nathan Mitchell, and I've spent the last 20 years saving people from the deadliest winters Alaska can throw at them. But this time felt different. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my coffee mug, and it wasn't from the caffeine. The memories of last season came flooding back, the sound of cracking ice, the roar of the avalanche, and watching helplessly as my climbing partner disappeared into the white void. The phone rang, snapping me back to reality. "Mitchell," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Nathan, we've lost all contact with the research station," Park Superintendent Harris said, her voice tight with worry. "Last transmission mentioned something about movement in whiteout conditions before they went dark. The satellite images..." She paused. "They show structural damage to the station. We need your team up there." I looked at the weather radar. The storm system covering Denali was unlike anything I'd seen in my 47 years. The colors on the screen were so dark they were almost black. "We've got maybe 3 days before this thing gets worse," I said. "I'll assemble the team." Within an hour, they were all in my office. Dr. Samantha Cho, the climate scientist, was already pulling up ice core data on her tablet. Her colleagues were among the missing, and I could see the worry lines around her eyes. Tyler Rhodes, our youngest ranger, stood by the window, his fingers drumming nervously against his leg. This would be his first major rescue operation, and I knew he was eager to prove himself. Emma Carter, our medic, was checking her supplies with military precision. Something about her movements reminded me she'd seen things during her Arctic deployments that she never talked about. Peter Nakashima, our communications expert, was fiddling with his radio equipment, his hearing aid occasionally squealing as he adjusted it. "Listen up," I said, spreading out the map on my desk. "We've got 6 researchers missing at the high-altitude station. They were doing some kind of deep ice core drilling when they went silent." I pointed to the location, marked with that ominous red dot. "The temperature up there is dropping below anything we've dealt with before. Our helicopter pilot just reported impossible ice formation on the rotors, so we're going in on snowmobiles as far as we can, then continuing on foot." "Doctor," Cho stepped forward. "There's something else you need to know," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The ice cores they were extracting, we found something in them. Air bubbles with impossible compositions, preserved materials that shouldn't exist at those depths." She looked at each of us. "Whatever they found up there, it wasn't what we expected." The room fell silent except for the howling wind outside. I shouldered my rescue pack, feeling its familiar weight. "Gear up. We leave in 30 minutes." As my team prepared, I caught my reflection in the window. The gray in my beard had spread since last season, and the lines around my eyes had deepened. I had a rule: never leave anyone behind, no matter the risk. But as I watched the dark storm clouds gathering over the mountain, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I didn't know it then, but we weren't just heading into a rescue mission. We were walking into something that had been waiting in the ice for centuries, something that was finally waking up. None of us would come back the same. The snowmobiles roared through the white landscape as we followed the GPS markers toward the research station. The wind was picking up, throwing snow in our faces even through our goggles. I led the group, with Tyler close behind me, then Emma, Dr. Cho, and Peter bringing up the rear. Something felt off about the wilderness around us. Usually, you'd see some signs of life, maybe tracks from an Arctic fox or a snow hare, but there was nothing. It was like all the animals had run away from something. "Nathan!" Tyler's voice crackled through our radio headsets. "We should stop soon. The light's getting bad." He was right. In Alaska's winter, darkness comes early, and we needed to set up camp while we could still see. I raised my hand in our signal to stop, and we pulled the snowmobiles into a half circle in a sheltered valley. Setting up the thermal tents was routine for us, something we'd done hundreds of times. But as Emma hammered in the last stake, she called me over. "Take a look at this," she said, pointing at the snow with her flashlight. I knelt down, frowning. There were marks in the snow. Not quite footprints, but long, smooth grooves, like something had been dragged. Except they started and stopped suddenly with no tracks leading to or from them. "Could be wind patterns," I said, but I didn't believe it. In 20 years of rescue work, I'd never seen wind make marks like these. Inside the main tent, Peter set up our radio equipment while Dr. Cho checked the weather reports on her laptop. The wind was getting louder, making the tent walls shake. "That's weird," Peter said, adjusting his hearing aid. "I'm picking up some kind of interference, like voices, but not quite." We all stopped to listen. Through the static of Peter's radio came something that made my skin crawl. It sounded almost like words, but in no language I'd ever heard. "Probably just radio waves bouncing off the ice," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Get some rest, everyone. Tomorrow's going to be tough." I took first watch, sitting near the tent's entrance with my thermos of coffee. The temperature display on my watch showed 40 degrees, colder than forecast. Through the tent's small window, I could see the snow swirling in our camp lights. That's when I noticed something strange. The swirling snow was making perfect circles around our camp, like someone had drawn them with a compass. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things. But the circles were still there. Just before midnight, Tyler's shout woke everyone up. He was standing outside his tent, staring at his snowmobile. "It won't start," he said when I reached him. "None of them will. I already checked the engines. Everything's fine, but they just won't turn over." Emma came over with a toolbox, but after an hour she threw up her hands in frustration. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "Mechanically, they're perfect. It's like something's just stopping them from working." A feeling of dread settled in my stomach. We were now 15 miles from the nearest outpost with 4 broken snowmobiles that should be working perfectly. And somewhere ahead of us, through the growing storm, 6 researchers were waiting for rescue. "We'll have to continue on foot," I said, looking at each member of my team. "We've got snowshoes in the emergency gear. We can make it." As we repacked our equipment into backpacks, I noticed more of those strange marks in the snow, this time forming a pattern that looked almost like writing. The wind had picked up again, and in it, I could have sworn I heard something that sounded like laughter. Dr. Cho came to stand beside me, her breath making clouds in the freezing air. "Nathan," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about those ice cores. We found cells in them, living cells, from something that shouldn't have survived that long in the ice." Before I could ask what she meant, our radios crackled to life. Through waves of static, we heard voices, our own voices, having a conversation none of us remembered having. Looking up at the dark shape of the mountain ahead, I realized we weren't just fighting the cold anymore. Something was out there in the whiteout, something that had been waiting in the ice for a very long time, and it knew we were coming. The climb took us most of the next day. Every step was a battle against the wind and cold, our snowshoes sinking deep into fresh powder. Finally, we reached the ridge that overlooked the research station. What we saw made us all stop in our tracks. "That's not right," Emma whispered. The station sat in a small valley below us, half buried in snow. But it wasn't the snow that bothered me. It was the way the building had collapsed. Instead of being crushed inward like you'd expect from an avalanche, the walls were pulled outward, like something had pushed its way out from inside. I pulled out our thermal camera, something we used to find people buried in snow. Through its screen, I could see the station was completely dark. No heat signatures at all. The backup generators should have been running, keeping the place warm enough to show up on our camera. "We need to check it out," I said, though everything in me wanted to turn back. "Tyler, you're with me. The rest of you set up a base camp, here where we can see the whole valley." Tyler and I started down the slope. About halfway down, he stopped to adjust his pack. "I'll catch up," he said. "Go ahead." I shouldn't have left him. That's what keeps eating at me even now. I only went about 50 yards ahead, but when Tyler caught up 5 minutes later, something about him was different. His eyes looked darker, and he wouldn't meet my gaze. The station's main door was open, swinging slowly in the wind. Inside, our flashlights showed a scene that made no sense. The research equipment wasn't just broken, it had been taken apart, piece by piece, laid out, on the floor in perfect lines, like someone was studying how it all worked. "Look at this," Tyler said, his voice oddly flat. He was pointing at the station's logbook, still sitting open on a desk. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. Day 15. The samples are moving, not melting, moving. Garcia swears he saw eyes in the ice core yesterday. We all laughed, but now, the noises at night aren't from the wind. They're watching us. They've always been watching us. The entry ended there. A pen had rolled off the desk, leaving a long mark across the page. I radioed the others to come down. While we waited, Tyler and I checked the sleeping quarters. The beds were made, everything neat and tidy. No signs of a struggle, just 6 coffee cups on a table. Still half full, now frozen solid. Dr. Cho went straight for the research lab when she arrived. She came out looking pale. "The ice cores," she said. "They're all gone, but that's not the worst part." She led us to a giant hole in the lab floor, at least 10 feet across. This was their drilling site. It was only supposed to be 8 inches wide. Emma shined her light down the hole. The beam disappeared into darkness, but we could see the walls weren't smooth like a drill would make. They had marks on them, like giant claw marks. And embedded in the ice walls were things. Old things. Stone tools, bits of leather, fragments of what looked like ancient carved bones. Peter was setting up our radio equipment when he called us over. "You need to hear this," he said, turning up the volume. Through the static, we heard voices. The missing researchers. But something was wrong with the recording. "This is Dr. Michael Garcia, Research Station Delta 7, the voice said. "We're all fine. Everything is normal. We'll be returning to base tomorrow." There was a pause, then the same. Words again, but slightly wrong, like someone learning to speak by copying sounds. Night was falling fast. We decided to sleep in shifts. 2 people awake at all times. I took first watch with Emma, while the others tried to rest. Around midnight, Emma grabbed my arm. "Nathan," she whispered, "look at Tyler." Tyler was standing outside in the snow, wearing nothing but his t-shirt and pants. The temperature was 60 below zero, but he wasn't shivering. He was just staring up at the sky, his skin looking almost transparent in the moonlight. When we brought him inside, he was burning with fever, but his skin felt like ice. "I can hear them," he kept saying. "They're coming up. They've been sleeping so long, and now they're waking up." That's when the power went out, plunging us into darkness. And in that darkness we heard something moving through the stations, halls, something that scraped against the walls and whispered in a language that sounded like cracking ice. We weren't alone in that station anymore. Maybe we never had been. And as I loaded my rifle with shaking hands, I realized we weren't the rescuers anymore. We were the trapped ones now. The backup generator kicked in after 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds in the dark changed everything. When the lights came back on, we found Tyler curled up in a corner, shaking. His skin had become so pale you could almost see through it. Emma checked his temperature. "This isn't possible," she said, checking the thermometer again. "His body temperature is below 80 degrees. He should be dead." But Tyler wasn't just alive. He was talking. Not to us, but to something we couldn't see. His words came out like steam in the cold air. They want their children back. Dr. Cho was going through the research station's computer files. "Nathan, you need to see this," she called me over. On the screen was a video from a week ago. One of the missing researchers, Dr. Garcia, was filming an ice core sample. As we watched, something dark moved inside the ice. "We found them by accident," Dr. Cho explained, her voice shaking. The ice cores contained cells that were still alive after thousands of years. But they weren't just surviving. They were growing. A loud bang echoed through the station. Peter, who had been watching the monitors, yelled out, "Movement in the East Corridor." I grabbed my rifle and ran to check, Emma right behind me with her medical kit. The metal walls of the corridor were covered in frost, forming patterns like frozen fingerprints. And there, at the end of the hall, was one of the missing researchers. "Dr. Garcia?" I called out. "Don't move. We're here to help." He turned around, slowly, and Emma grabbed my arm. Dr. Garcia's skin was as transparent as glass, and behind it, we could see dark shapes moving like shadows in water. When he opened his mouth, the voice that came out wasn't human. "You took our children," the thing that wasn't Dr. Garcia said. "We want them back." We backed away slowly. Emma pulled out a flare, its red light filling the corridor. The creature that looked like Dr. Garcia hissed and retreated into the shadows. Back in the main lab, Peter was going through old military files on his laptop. "I found something," he said. "In 1978, a Soviet research team disappeared up here. Their last report mentioned finding transparent figures in the ice. Everyone thought they went crazy from the cold." Tyler suddenly sat up, his eyes wide. "I remember now," he said. His voice sounded different, older somehow. "My grandmother used to tell stories. She was from an Inuit family. She said there were people who lived in the deepest ice who could only be seen in the worst storms. The elders called them the Frozen Ones." A crackling sound made us all jump. Strange ice crystals were forming on the lab windows, growing into shapes that looked like letters from an unknown alphabet. Dr. Cho was studying them with a small microscope. "These crystals, they're growing in impossible ways. And look, there's something inside them. The same organisms we found in the ice cores. They're trying to talk to us," Tyler said. He walked to the window and touched the crystals. Where his fingers met the ice, more patterns formed. "They're ancient. They've been here since the last ice age. But now..." "Now what?" I asked. "The ice is melting," Tyler said. "Their world is disappearing. They're scared and angry." He turned to look at us, and his eyes had changed. They looked like they were made of ice. They want to survive, just like we do. Emma had been quiet, but now she spoke up. "When I was in the military, we had a classified mission up here. We found things in the ice, things that didn't make sense. The government covered it up, but they've always known something was here." The temperature in the room suddenly dropped. Frost crept across the floor like living things, forming those same circular patterns we'd seen around our camp. Through the windows, we could see the storm getting worse, the snow now so thick it looked like static on a TV screen. And in that static, shapes were moving, tall, thin figures that seemed to be made of ice and shadow, walking upright through the blizzard like it wasn't there. "They're coming," Tyler said, his voice calm even as his body started to change, his skin becoming more transparent by the minute. "They want to show us something. In the deep ice, where they've been sleeping." I checked my rifle, knowing it probably wouldn't do any good against what was coming. The creatures outside were getting closer, and now we could see through their transparent bodies, organs that looked like frozen crystal, bones like Arctic glaciers. They were beautiful in a terrible way, and they were here to take back what we had stolen from their frozen world. I looked at my team, at Tyler's changing face, at Emma's determined expression, at Dr. Cho's fascinated horror, at Peter's trembling hands on his radio equipment. We had come to rescue others, but now we had to rescue ourselves, and the storm was only getting worse. The creatures surrounded the research station as the storm raged outside. Inside, we huddled in the main lab, watching ice creep across the walls, like living frost. The temperature kept dropping. Even our best heaters couldn't keep up. "They're not trying to break in," Emma said, watching the monitors. "They're changing the station itself." She was right. The ice wasn't just covering things, it was transforming them. Our equipment turned into perfect ice sculptures of itself. It was like the whole station was being frozen in time. Tyler sat in the corner, his skin now so clear we could see his heartbeat. But his heart was beating too slowly, maybe once every minute. He should have been dead. Instead, he was changing. "I can understand them better now," he said softly. "They're not just angry about the ice cores. They're scared. The world is getting warmer. Their ice is melting. Soon they won't have anywhere left to sleep." Dr. Cho was trying to talk to them through Tyler. She'd write questions on a whiteboard, and Tyler would translate the answers that came through patterns in the ice. "They've been here longer than humans," he explained. "When the great ice sheets covered the Earth, they helped early humans survive the cold, taught them how to build shelters, find food. But as the world got warmer, they had to retreat deeper, into the ice." Peter, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly grabbed my arm. "The radio," he said, pulling off his hearing aid. "Listen, without this, there's a pattern in the static." I put on his headphones. At first, I just heard noise, but then I noticed it. A rhythm, like music made of breaking ice and whistling wind. It was their language. "We need to show them we understand," Emma said. She dug through her medical kit and pulled out something that looked like a small radio. "This emits frequencies that can disrupt their bioelectric field, but maybe we can use it to talk back." Before we could try, the power went out again. This time, the backup generator didn't kick in. In the darkness, we heard ice cracking and shifting all around us. "Nobody move," I whispered, but it was too late. A soft blue light filled the room. Standing among us was one of them, a creature made of living ice, its transparent body glowing from within. Through its clear skin, we could see organs that looked like crystals and bones like frozen rivers. It reached out toward Tyler with a hand that looked like carved ice. Tyler stood up, moving like he was in a trance. When their hands touched, the whole room lit up with flowing patterns of light. "They're showing me," Tyler gasped. "Everything, their history, their memories." His voice changed, becoming deeper, older. "They don't want to hurt us. They want to survive. Like we do." The creature turned its head toward me. Its eyes were like diamonds with galaxies trapped inside them. In my mind, I saw flashes of images. Great ice sheets covering the Earth. Creatures. Of frost teaching humans to build their first fires. Centuries of peaceful sleep in the deep ice, and then warmth, danger, melting. The ice cores, Dr. Cho said suddenly. They weren't just samples. They were their children, sleeping, waiting for the right time to wake up. Emma stepped forward, her military training forgotten as she stared at the creature in wonder. "We can help them," she said. "The government has deep storage facilities, places where they could sleep safely even if the world gets warmer." The creature made a sound like wind through ice caves. More of them appeared in the doorways, their bodies glowing with that same blue light. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Tyler translated their response. "They say it's too late for that. They've already started to change. To, adapt." He looked at his own transparent skin. Like me. I realized then what was happening. They weren't just trying to survive. They were evolving, and they were offering that evolution to us. Another memory flashed in my mind. My partner, lost in last year's avalanche. Had they found him? Changed him? Was he out there now, part of their frozen world? The storm outside got even stronger, the wind screaming past the station. But it wasn't just a storm anymore. It was them, spreading their influence, preparing for a world where the ice was melting but they refused to vanish. "We have to make a choice," I said, looking at my team. "Right now." But as I looked at their faces, Tyler's peaceful expression, Emma's fascination, Dr. Cho's scientific curiosity, and Peter's quiet acceptance, I realized they had already chosen. The question was, what would I choose? The creature held out its hand to me, offering the same gift it had given Tyler. Behind it, through the window, I could see more of its kind moving through the storm, their bodies glowing like the northern lights. And I knew that after tonight, the world's winters would never be the same again. I stared at the ice creature's outstretched hand, remembering all the people I'd failed to save over the years, including my partner, lost in last winter's avalanche. Maybe if I'd been different then, stronger, more adapted to the cold, I could have saved him. But before I could decide, our satellite phone crackled to life. The base camp's voice came through. "Rescue helicopter incoming. ETA 10 minutes. They've spotted the missing researchers. They just walked into base camp an hour ago." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean they walked into camp?" "They're all here, safe and sound," the voice said, "though they're acting a bit strange." I looked at the creatures surrounding us. They had already spread beyond this station. Those weren't the real researchers who had returned to base. They were ice copies, perfect duplicates sent to fool everyone. "We need to stop this," I said, backing away from the creature's hand. "You can't just replace people." The creature's glow turned darker, angry. The temperature dropped so fast the metal walls of the station started to crack. "Wait!" Tyler stepped between us, his now transparent skin shimmering. "They're not replacing us. They're offering us a choice, a way to survive together." Dr. Cho pulled out the last remaining ice core sample from her protected case. "The children," she said softly. "We can give them back their children." The creature's light brightened again, but as Dr. Cho moved forward with the sample, the whole station shook. The helicopter was getting close, its rotors disrupting the storm the creatures had created. "If that helicopter lands, everyone on it will be in danger," Emma said. "The creatures will defend themselves." I had to make a choice. "Fast." "Tyler," I said, "tell them we understand now. We'll help them, find them safe, places in the deep ice away from the warming world. But they have to let us stay human, and they have to let that helicopter land safely." Tyler translated my words into that strange ice language. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the creature reached out, not to change me, but to share another vision. I saw the future they feared, a world without deep ice, without safe places to sleep through the warm years. But I also saw another possibility. Humans and ice creatures working together, finding ways to protect the last cold places of the world. The creature pulled back its hand and nodded. The storm around the station began to calm. "They agree," Tyler said. "But they want me to stay with them, to be a bridge between our worlds." His mother's Inuit blood had made him perfect for the change. He was already part of their world now. The helicopter landed as the storm cleared. When the rescue team ran in, guns ready, they found us all human, except for Tyler, who had disappeared into the whiteout with the creatures. We told the official story just like we'd agreed. Experimental gases from the ice cores had caused hallucinations. The missing researchers had just gotten lost in the storm. Everything was normal, but I kept one small secret. Where the creature had touched my hand, a tiny patch of skin had turned clear as ice. In the coldest weather, I can see through it, like a window into another world. A reminder that the creatures are still out there, watching and waiting in the deep ice. Now, whenever I hear about strange ice formations in cities during winter storms, or about people surviving impossible cold, I think about Tyler and the creatures. They're adapting. just like they said they would, moving through our world in their own way. And on the coldest nights, when the wind sounds like whispers and the snow makes perfect circles, I wonder if they're watching me through my window, considering whether humanity made the right choice. Because winter isn't just a season anymore. It's alive. And it remembers. 3 years later, I sit in my office at Denali National Park, watching the first snow of winter fall outside my window. My coffee has gone cold, but I don't mind anymore. The cold and I have a different relationship these days. The patch of clear skin on my hand has grown a little. Not much, just enough to cover my palm now. Dr. Cho says it's because I was touched by their power, even if I didn't fully change, like Tyler did. Sometimes in the winter, I can see right through my hand, like it's made of the clearest ice. We've kept our promise to the ice creatures. Dr. Cho now runs a secret research program, funded by the government, to find and protect the deepest, coldest places left in the world. She calls them winter sanctuaries, places where the creatures can sleep safely, even as the world gets warmer. Emma left the rescue service and joined Dr. Cho's team. Her military connections helped convince the government to help without asking too many questions. She says it's the most important mission she's ever had. Peter's hearing never quite recovered from that night, but he discovered something interesting. He can hear the creatures' songs better than anyone else now. He works with Tyler, learning their language, helping us communicate with them. Tyler, we see him sometimes during the worst storms. He looks happy, peaceful, more than human now, but still himself somehow. He leads groups of creatures to the sanctuaries we've prepared, making sure both our worlds can survive side by side. The official story hasn't changed. The public doesn't know about the ice creatures, and maybe that's for the best. But people have started noticing things. Strange ice patterns during winter storms, mysterious lights in snowfall, stories of people surviving impossible cold. Last week, I got a letter from a rescue team in Norway. They described finding perfect circles in the snow around their camp and hearing voices in the storm that sounded like breaking ice. I sent them to Dr. Cho. Another sanctuary will be built there soon. The missing researchers who returned to base camp that night. They live normal lives now, as far as anyone can tell, but in the coldest weather, their skin sometimes turns just a little bit clear. They're not quite human anymore, but they're not quite creatures either. They're something in between, like the first drops of rain before a storm. I still run rescue missions. I have to. It's who I am. But now I have help that no other rescue service in the world has. When someone gets lost in the worst storms, I just have to touch my clear palm to the nearest ice and whisper for help. The creatures find them, protect them, lead them to safety. They remember our agreement. Sometimes at night I dream about my old climbing partner, the one I lost in the avalanche. In my dreams, he's smiling, his skin clear as winter ice, walking through endless snow without. Feeling the cold. Maybe he's still out there, changed like Tyler, living in a world of eternal winter. I hope so. The snow is falling harder now. Through my ice window hand I can see shapes moving in the storm. Tall, graceful figures that glow with their own light. They know I'm watching. One of them waves, and I wave back. Winter isn't what people think it is. It's not just a season, not just snow and ice and cold. It's alive, awake, and watching. And if you're ever caught in a blizzard and see perfect circles in the snow around you, or hear what sounds like singing in the wind, don't be afraid. The children of winter are there to help, just like they helped us all those years ago when humans first faced the endless cold. They're still teaching us how to survive. All you have to do is listen to the storm. I never should have gone down that cave. But when you've spent 30 years exploring the darkest places on Earth, you start believing you're ready for anything. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. My name is Philip Reeves, and I'm a cave specialist at Carlsbad Caverns. Well, I was. After what happened under Wonder Mountain, I'm not sure what I am anymore. My hands shake as I write this, not just from my Parkinson's, which I'd kept secret from everyone at work. No, they shake because I need to warn you about what we found down there, what's still down there, and maybe what's now inside me. It started on a Tuesday morning in June 1983. I was in my office reviewing some routine paperwork when Dr. Allison Nash burst in, waving a stack of papers covered in jagged lines. "Phil, you need to see this," she said, spreading the seismic readings across my desk. "These patterns, they're impossible. There's something huge down there, a chamber system we never knew existed." I squinted at the readings. After 3 decades of mapping Carlsbad's caves, I thought I knew every twist and turn beneath the park. But these readings showed something different, something big. "We need to put together a team," Allison insisted, "right away." That's how I ended up assembling the strangest group of people I'd ever worked with. There was Allison herself, ambitious and brilliant, her eyes gleaming with the promise of discovery. Raymond Ortega, a local guide whose family had been telling stories about the caves for generations. He kept fingering a small metal charm his grandmother had given him, though he claimed he didn't believe in the old legends. Dr. Julia Winters joined us too, a microbiologist who studied the weird little creatures that lived in the caves. She was quiet, professional, clearly using work to escape some personal troubles. And then there was Benjamin, my brother. We hadn't spoken in years, not since his reckless behavior got another diver killed. But we needed the best cave diver available, and despite everything, that was still him. When he walked into the visitor center that morning, the tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. "Phil," he nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. "Ben," I replied just as stiffly. We spent that morning checking our equipment. The newest sonar mapping tools, climbing gear, enough supplies. For 10 days underground, I noticed Julia examining some strange bacterial growth near the entrance, muttering about impossible reproduction rates. Raymond was oddly quiet, performing some kind of blessing ritual when he thought no one was watching. The descent began normally. Enough. We passed through the regular tourist caves, the ones I could navigate blindfolded. But then we reached the vertical shaft that would take us into unmapped territory. 800 feet down, we set up our base camp in the last known chamber. That's when I noticed something odd. A faint breeze where there shouldn't have been one. In caves, moving air means there's another way out, or something else moving the air around. None of us slept well that first night. The darkness felt different down there, thicker somehow. And when we finally did drift off, we all had the same dream. Ancient eyes watching us from the walls, patient and hungry, waiting for us to go deeper. I woke up covered in cold sweat, my hands shaking worse than usual. I doubled my medication when no one was looking. As team leader, I couldn't show weakness, not now. Not when we were about to discover something that would change everything we thought we knew about what lives in the dark. If only I'd known then what that change would really mean. Morning came, though you couldn't tell underground. My watch said 7 a.m. when we packed up our gear to explore further. That's when we found something strange. A crack in the wall that felt warm to the touch. In caves this deep, everything is usually cold. "Look at this," Julia said, shining her light into the crack. A soft, blue-green glow pulsed from deep inside, like nothing I'd seen in 30 years of caving. Raymond hung back, his face pale. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he said quietly, "about something that lives in the deepest parts of these caves. Something hungry." He clutched his metal charm tightly. I was about to reassure him when Benjamin pushed past us both. "We're not here for ghost stories," he said, already pulling out his rope. "This crack looks wide enough to squeeze through." "Ben, wait," I called out. "We need to check it's safe first." But he was already gone, wiggling through the gap before anyone could stop him. Classic Benjamin, always rushing in. My hands started shaking again, and not just from the Parkinson's. After 10 tense minutes, we heard his voice echo back. "You guys need to see this." One by one, we squeezed through the crack. It was a tight fit, the kind that makes your heart race as rock scrapes against your back and chest. But what we found on the other side made us forget all about that fear. We were standing in a cave bigger than a football field, with walls that stretched up into darkness. Weird mushrooms gave off that blue-green light we'd seen, and strange formations hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls made of glass. Our lights caught crystals in the walls that sparkled like stars. "This is impossible," Allison whispered, checking her instruments. "The radiation readings are strange, but not dangerous." She walked around in circles, taking measurements and muttering to herself. Julia was already collecting samples of the glowing mushrooms. "These aren't like any fungi I've ever seen," she said. "They almost look like both plant and animal." But it was what Benjamin found that really made my skin crawl. On one wall, hidden behind a curtain of crystals, were paintings. Old ones. They showed stick figures of people merging with something else, something with too many limbs and no real shape. "Hey!" Benjamin called out again. He was standing by a small tunnel half filled with water. "I'm going to check where this leads." "Not alone," I said firmly. "We stick together down here." "I'll be fine," he smiled. "Just a quick look." And before I could stop him, he pulled on his diving gear and slipped into the water. Those were the longest 45 minutes of my life. When Benjamin finally came back, something felt off about him. He was smiling more, being nicer. He even apologized for the fight we'd had years ago. It wasn't like him at all. We set up camp in the big chamber that night. Our equipment kept picking up weird electrical signals like static on a radio. Julia's mushroom samples were acting. Strange, too. They seemed to be eating other things in her collection box. I tried to write in my journal before bed, but my hands were shaking too badly. When I finally did fall asleep, I dreamed about Benjamin's dive. In my dream, he found something in that underwater tunnel. Or maybe something found him. But that was just a dream, right? Wrong. What happened next would prove that sometimes the real nightmares aren't the ones we have while sleeping. They're the ones we find in the dark when we're wide awake. Day 3 underground started with a scream. I rushed out of my sleeping bag to find Julia staring at her sample box, her face white as chalk. The mushrooms she'd collected weren't just growing. They were changing shape. Right before our eyes, they were turning into exact copies of the other cave plants in the box. "That's not possible," she kept saying, her hand shaking as she took pictures. "Living things can't just copy themselves like this." But that wasn't even the scariest thing we found that day. While exploring a new tunnel, Raymond's light caught something in the wall. At first, I thought it was just another crystal formation. Then I saw the boot. There were people in the wall, 3 of them, old-time miners judging by their clothes. But they weren't skeletons. They looked perfectly preserved, like they'd somehow been frozen inside the rock itself. Their faces were twisted in fear. Raymond wouldn't go near them. He hadn't slept all night, saying he kept hearing whispers in his native language echoing through the caves. None of us heard anything, but the fear in his eyes was real enough. Benjamin was acting stranger by the hour. I caught him sneaking samples of Julia's copying mushrooms into his pocket. When I asked him about it, he just smiled that new, weird smile of his and said he wanted to study them closer. "We should check out the lower chamber," he kept saying. "The one underwater. There's something amazing down there." But Allison was acting odd, too. She'd stopped taking notes on her readings and just kept walking deeper into the cave system, like she was being pulled by something. When I tried to talk to her about safety protocols, she barely seemed to hear me. Then we found the chambers that looked like, well, like organs. Like we were walking through the insides of some giant living thing. The walls were soft and warm. In some places, they almost seemed to pulse. "Look at this," Julia called out. She was pointing at something on the floor, a puddle of silvery liquid that was moving by itself, crawling up the wall against gravity. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my camera. When we checked the photos later, every group shot had extra shadows in it. Extra figures. Like there were more people with us than there should be. That night, I saw Benjamin collecting more samples when he thought everyone was asleep. But the way he moved, it wasn't natural. His arms stretched out too far, bent in ways arms shouldn't bend. Julia saw it too. She pulled me aside, her voice barely a whisper. "Phil," she said, "I've been analyzing those samples. The mushrooms, the silver, liquid. They're all the same thing. They can copy anything living they touch. And I found human cells in them. Lots of different human cells." "What are you saying?" I asked. But I think I already knew. "I'm saying that's not your brother anymore. The real Benjamin never came back from that dive. That's when we heard Raymond scream." He was backing away from Benjamin, holding out his grandmother's charm. The metal had turned black where it touched my brother's skin. And Benjamin. His face wasn't staying still. It was rippling, like water in the wind. "The hungry one," Raymond gasped. "It's here. It's been here all along." Benjamin's smile grew too wide for his face. Now, he said, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was like 100 voices speaking at once. "We can't have you spoiling the surprise." His arm shot out, literally shot out, stretching across the room like melted plastic. Raymond tried to run. He wasn't fast enough. I'll never forget Raymond's scream. 1 second he was there, the next. I can't even write about what happened. We ran. What else could we do? Julia, Allison, and I locked ourselves in a side tunnel pushing rocks against the entrance. "We have to get out of here," Julia said, trying to catch her breath. "We have to warn someone." But when we tried our radio, all we got was our own voices coming back to us, saying things we hadn't said yet. Things about being trapped, about being hungry. That's when Allison started. "Laughing, don't you see?" she said, her face splitting into that same wrong smile Benjamin had. "You can't warn anyone. You can't stop us. We've been alone down here for so long." Julia grabbed my arm. "Phil, the charm. Raymond's charm. Quick." I still had it. I'd grabbed it when we ran. Julia pressed it against Allison's skin and she screamed. Not a human scream. Her skin bubbled and turned gray where the metal touched it. "It's the metal," Julia said. "Something in it hurts them." We tied Allison up with our climbing ropes, but it didn't matter. During a small earthquake, her whole body just melted. She slipped through the ropes like water and disappeared into a crack in the wall. We were trapped, low on food. No way to contact the surface. And somewhere out there, 2 things wearing our friends' faces were hunting us. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I was running low on my medicine. That's when the water started whispering to me. First, I thought I was going crazy. But every time I got close to our water bottles, I could hear voices, see things. The creature, the real one, was trying to talk to me. It showed me everything. How it fell from the sky millions of years ago, inside a rock that crashed into these caves. How it lived down here alone, learning to copy the simple cave life it found. How it grew smarter, bigger, lonelier. The whole cave system was one huge creature. And now it wanted to learn about us, to become us. "Phil," Julia's voice snapped me back. She was looking at her samples through a small microscope. "The pieces we collected, they're changing. The metal from Raymond's charm isn't hurting them anymore. They're learning to resist it." That's when we heard Benjamin's voice, my real brother's voice, calling from the dark. Phil! Julia! Help me, please. I'm hurt. The thing that took my face. It left me down here. Julia grabbed my arm. It's a trick. It has to be. But what if it wasn't? What if my real brother was still alive down there, alone in the dark? The voice came closer. Phil, remember that time when we were kids? When Dad took us fishing and you fell in the lake? Remember how I pulled you out? My heart stopped. That had really happened. Something only the real Benjamin would know. We have to help him, I said. Phil, no. Julia tried to stop me. Think about it. It has your brother's memories. It must get them when it copies someone. She was right. But by then, it was too late. The walls around us started moving. Not shaking like in an earthquake. Moving like muscles. Like we were inside a giant throat that was about to swallow. And somewhere in the dark, Benjamin was still calling my name. The walls kept moving, squeezing in around us. Julia and I ran, our lights bouncing off wet stone that looked more like skin with every step. Behind us, Benjamin's voice had changed. It wasn't trying to sound human anymore. You can't run from us forever, it called, the voice now sounding like 10 people talking at once. We're the cave. We're everywhere. We found ourselves in a tunnel that sloped down into darkness. Water trickled past our feet, heading deeper, underground. It was our only way out. Look, Julia pointed her light at the water. Tiny silver specks were moving in it, swimming against the current, like the creature was in every drop. My bottle of medicine slipped from my shaking hands, splashing, into the stream. I watched helplessly as my pills dissolved in the infected water. We need to find another way, I said, trying to hide how scared I was. Without my medicine, the shaking would only get worse. That's when Julia grabbed my arm. Hard. Phil, she whispered. I drank from that stream an hour ago. I looked at her face in the flashlight beam. Tiny silver lines were already crawling under her skin like mercury in a thermometer. It's inside me, she said. Her voice was shaking, but she stayed calm. That was Julia, a scientist to the end. I can feel it. It's trying to think with my brain. Use my memories. There has to be something we can do. I started digging through our backpack for Raymond's charm, but Julia stopped me. Listen to me, she said. The metal won't work anymore. But I figured. Something out. The rocks down here, they're full of uranium. That's what's been keeping the creature trapped all these years. It can't spread past these caves because the uranium hurts it. Her eyes were changing now, getting that silvery look I'd seen in Benjamin's. Phil, take these. She pressed some rocks into my hand. They were warm to the touch. I collected them earlier. They're radioactive, but not enough to hurt you. Not right away. But they'll hurt it. Julia. I don't have much time, she said. Her voice was starting to sound strange, like there were other voices mixed in with it. There's a big chamber up ahead, like a pool. That's its heart, where it really lives. You have to. She screamed then, doubling over. When she looked up, her face was changing, rippling like water. Run, Phil! It was still Julia's voice, fighting through. Run, now! I ran. Behind me, I heard her body splash into the water. When I looked back, Julia was gone. In her place was a silver puddle that was already flowing away, merging with the cave walls. The tunnel got steeper. The air got warmer. I could hear voices all around me now. Raymond, Allison, Benjamin, Julia, all of them calling out, begging me to stop, to join them. But mixed in with their voices was something older, something that had been down here in the dark for millions of years, all alone, dreaming of the world above. It was waiting for me up ahead. I could feel it, and I was walking right toward it, with nothing but a handful of warm rocks and my shaking hands to fight it with. The chamber I walked into was the biggest I'd ever seen. In the center was a pool of silvery liquid that glowed with its own light. The surface wasn't still. It moved like it was breathing. This was it. the heart of the creature. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight. Without my medicine, the tremors were getting worse. That's when I heard splashing. Shapes were rising from the pool. First came Benjamin, then Allison, then Raymond. Last was Julia. But they weren't really my friends anymore. Their skin rippled and flowed like liquid metal. "Welcome home, Philip," they all said at once. Then the pool itself spoke to my mind. It showed me things. Wonderful, terrible things. How lonely it had been down here. How it wanted to learn, to grow, to be more than just a copy. It showed me what would happen if it got out. A world where no one would ever be alone. Where everyone would be connected, sharing one giant mind. "Join us," Benjamin's voice said. "Let me help you, big brother. Like I always did." He reached out his hand. No more Parkinson's. No more shaking. No more being afraid. I looked down at my trembling hands, still holding Julia's radioactive rocks. The creature was right. I was afraid. I'd been afraid ever since I first got my diagnosis. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of being helpless. Think about it, Julia's voice now. All our memories, all our knowledge, living forever. Isn't that what science is for? To discover amazing things? Part of me wanted to say yes. To just let go and become part of something bigger. That's when I felt the tremor. A real one this time, shaking the whole cave. And I remembered something from all my years exploring these caves. There was a major fault line running right under us. I still had our last pack of explosive charges in my bag, the ones we used to clear blocked tunnels. "You're right," I said. "I am afraid, but being afraid is part of being human." I threw Julia's rocks straight into the pool. The silver liquid hissed and bubbled where they hit. The copies of my friends screamed. Not with human voices anymore. While they were distracted, I set the charges along the fault line. My hands were shaking worse than ever, but somehow I got them placed. "Stop!" the creature roared with 100 voices. "You'll kill them. Your friends, your brother, they're all here with us." "No," I said. "You just stole their faces. Their memories. The real them. They're already gone." I hit the detonator. The explosion was huge. Rocks started falling everywhere. The chamber began to collapse. I ran for the exit tunnel but got stuck in a narrow spot. The walls were closing in. Not just from the cave-in, the creature was trying to trap me. That's when I felt something touch my leg. It was Benjamin, or what looked like him. But his face was different now. Scared. Human. "Phil," he said in my brother's real voice. "Let me help. One last time. But you have to let me give you a small piece of myself. Just enough to get you out. Please, I don't want to die alone down here." The rocks were still falling. Water was rushing in. I had seconds to decide. I looked into my brother's eyes, or whatever was wearing his face, and made my choice. Yes, I felt a cold sting on my ankle. Then suddenly I was moving faster, stronger. My hands stopped shaking. Together, we squeezed through the tunnel as the cave collapsed behind us. I ran until I saw light. Real light from the surface. Behind me, a final rumble sealed the cave forever. I was out. I was alive. I was changed. They found me 3 days later, wandering the park trails. The rescue team said I was babbling about silver pools and people melting into walls. They blamed it on dehydration and shock. Where are the others? They kept asking. I told them about the cave-in, about how our equipment failed and we got lost, about how the others didn't make it out. All true, in a way, just not the whole truth. They wrote it all up as a tragic accident. 5 dead in a cave. Collapse. Very sad, very normal. The kind of thing that sometimes happens to cave explorers, but things weren't normal. Not for me. First, my Parkinson's symptoms disappeared completely. The doctors called it a miracle. They wrote papers about how extreme stress can sometimes cause the brain to rewire itself. Then I started remembering things I couldn't possibly know. I remembered Julia's first day of college, the proud look on her parents' faces. I remembered the day Raymond's grandmother gave him that charm, warning him about the hungry ones below. I remembered Benjamin's last moments in that underwater tunnel when he first met the creature. They weren't just memories. They were part of me now, just like that small silver patch on my ankle that sometimes moves when I'm not looking at it. I wrote my official report recommending the cave system be permanently sealed, sent it to all the right people. But then I did something else. Late at night, when my hands were steady as rocks, I sat at my computer and wrote another report. The true one. About what's really down there. About what it can do. About how it's still waiting, learning, growing. I sent that report to every geological survey office in the world. Because here's the thing about caves. They're all connected if you go deep enough. And now I know there are other silver pools down there, other hungry things waiting in the dark. And sometimes late at night I hear them whispering, calling to the small piece of them that lives inside me, telling me about other caves, other places where the walls move and the shadows have too many eyes. But that's not the scariest part. The scariest part is that sometimes I want to answer back. My hands don't shake anymore when I write. They haven't shaken in years. But the thing that cured them is spreading. Slowly, a little more each day. I can feel it. So I'm leaving this story here as a warning. If you're a cave explorer, a scientist, or just someone who likes to poke around in dark places, remember this. Sometimes the darkness looks back. Sometimes it reaches out to help you, and sometimes when it touches you, it never really lets go. I never thought the forests I'd spent 20 years protecting would turn against us. But that's exactly what happened in the fall of 1968, when the ancient redwoods of Northern California revealed their darkest secret. It started with a radio call about destroyed research equipment deep in the park. Usually, we blame bears for that kind of thing. They love tearing up anything that smells interesting. But what I found that foggy morning was different. Very different. The research camp looked like it had been hit by a tornado, but only in a perfect circle. Everything inside that circle was crushed or twisted, while the trees and bushes just a few feet away stood perfectly still. That's when I met Linda Morgan, the scientist whose equipment was ruined. She was hiding in her truck, her hands shaking, as she clutched her notebook. "I heard it all night," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Something huge moving through the trees. But there were no footsteps, just shadows that shouldn't have been there. I nodded, trying to hide my limp as I walked around the circle of destruction. The injury from Vietnam still bothered me on, damp days like this, but I'd gotten used to it. What I couldn't get used to was the weird moss patterns on the trees. They formed shapes that looked almost like writing, but not in any language I knew. "Look at this," I said, taking photos of the moss. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" Linda shook her head. She was supposed to be studying how redwood trees grow, but now her scientific equipment lay in pieces around us. As we gathered what we could salvage, I noticed something else wrong. The forest was too quiet. Anyone who's worked in these woods knows they're never silent. There's always something. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling. But around us, in a perfect circle matching the destruction, there was nothing. Just dead silence. We found the first deer body that afternoon. I wish we hadn't. Its body was twisted in ways that made no sense, like someone had tried to fold it like paper. Worse, there were vines and roots growing through it, as if the forest was trying to absorb it. I'd seen a lot of animal attacks in my years as a ranger, but nothing like this. "We should go," Linda said, and for once I agreed with the scientist right away. But as we turned to leave, the fog rolled in. Not the normal coastal fog that drifts in slowly. This was different. It came in like a wave, thick and purposeful, surrounding us in seconds. That's when I saw it for the first time. Through the fog, a shape moved between the ancient redwoods. It was huge, bigger than any bear, and it seemed to change size as it moved. 1 second, it looked as tall as the trees themselves. The next, it shrank down to human size. But the worst part was how it moved. Not like any animal I'd ever seen. It flowed like a shadow, like it was part of the darkness itself. We managed to set up camp that night, but neither of us slept much. The shadows around our campfire moved wrong, stretching against the light instead of away from it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape moving through the trees. And all night long, the silence pressed in around us, heavy as a tomb. I'd spent most of my life in these woods. After coming back from Vietnam, they'd been my escape, my safe place. But now, watching the shadows dance against our fire, I realized something terrible. The forest I thought I knew so well had been hiding secrets. Ancient secrets. And now, for some reason, it was ready to show them to us. Linda huddled closer to the fire, her face pale in the flickering light. "What do you think is happening?" she whispered. I checked my service revolver, the one I'd started carrying after a mountain lion attack 3 years ago. For the first time since Vietnam, I had the feeling I might need it. "I don't know," I answered. "Honestly. But whatever it is, it's just getting started." In the darkness beyond our camp, something moved, and this time I knew it was watching us. The morning light should have made things better. It didn't. Our camp was surrounded by broken branches arranged in perfect circles, like someone, or something, had been busy while we slept. I was taking pictures of them when an old woman appeared out of the fog. She moved so quietly I didn't hear her until she spoke. "You've entered the Shadow Keeper's territory." Her voice was soft but firm, like someone used to being listened to. She introduced herself as Jessie Whitefeather, and the look in her eyes told me she knew more than she was saying. "What's a Shadow Keeper?" Linda asked, her scientific curiosity winning over her fear. Jessie touched one of the broken branches. "Not what? Who?" "The Shadow Keeper is as old as these trees. It's a guardian that can become one with the darkness itself." She looked straight at me. "You saw it last night, didn't you? The shape that changes size?" Before I could answer, we heard an engine. Deputy Gregory Martin pulled up in his patrol car, his shiny badge catching the morning light. He was young, eager to prove himself, and I could tell right away he wasn't going to believe anything we said. "Bears," he said, not even looking at the perfect circles of branches. "Maybe a mountain lion. We'll set up some cameras and solve this by dinner." He smiled at Jessie like she was a lost tourist. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here alone. It's not safe." That's when we found the footprints. They were huge, deep in the mud, but that wasn't the strange part. They appeared and disappeared randomly, like whatever made them could walk through air. Some were even going up the sides of trees, as if gravity didn't matter. "Those aren't bear tracks," Linda said quietly, measuring them with her ruler. "They're not anything I've ever studied. Deputy Martin set up his trail cameras anyway, even after Jessie warned him they wouldn't work." "The Shadow Keeper doesn't show up on mechanical eyes," she said. But Martin just laughed and kept working. That afternoon, an old man walked into our camp like he owned the place. His name was Bill Reynolds, but everyone called him Old Bill. He was a logger turned forest protector, and something about the way he looked at the trees made me nervous. "The old ones are awake," he said, touching a redwood trunk gently. "I heard them calling." None of us asked how he heard trees calling. We were all too afraid of the answer. That night we checked Martin's cameras. Most showed nothing but static, except for single frames that made my blood run cold. In those split-second images, we could see a massive figure with eyes that glowed like amber in darkness. Martin stopped laughing after that. We all slept in a group, but somehow our equipment moved while we slept. Every piece of metal, our tools, Martin's handcuffs, my revolver, had been arranged in perfect circles just like the branches. Even Martin couldn't explain that away. "Listen," Jesse said as we stared at the circles. "The forest is trying to tell you something. Those circles are warnings. The Shadow Keeper is angry about the new logging roads, about the machines getting closer to its sacred places." "There's no such thing as sacred places," Martin snapped, but his voice shook. "This is all just... A deep boom cut through the forest, like a giant drum being struck. We all jumped. The sound came again, closer this time. In the growing darkness, I saw fear on every face, even Martin's. Old Bill smiled a sad smile. "They're coming to check on us," he said. "The old ones want to know what we're going to do about their home being destroyed." The shadows began to stretch toward us, even though the sun was setting behind us. They should have pointed the other way. Linda grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "Harrison," she whispered, "look at the trees." I looked up. In the dying light, every branch above us was pointing down at our group, like countless fingers. And in the shadows between them, something was moving. The drumming sound came again, and this time I realized what it was. Footsteps. Something massive was walking toward our camp, something that made the earth shake with each step. Martin reached for his gun. "Don't," Jesse warned. "That's the worst thing you could do right now." But we all knew it was too late. The Shadow Keeper was coming to pay us a visit, and no amount of weapons or cameras or scientific equipment would help us now. In the gathering dark, I heard Old Bill whisper, "The forest remembers everything we've done to it. Everything. And now it's time to pay the price." Old Bill led us deeper into the forest the next morning. None of us wanted to go, but we all knew we had to understand what we were dealing with. The fog was thick as soup, and the trees looked different somehow, twisted in ways that made my head hurt to look at them. "Here," Bill said, stopping in a clearing. "This is where I first saw one, back in '46. What we found made Linda drop her notebook. The trees had grown into cage-like shapes, their trunks and branches weaving together, like fingers. Inside one of these wooden cages was something that made Deputy Martin throw up his breakfast. It was the missing logger from 2 years ago, the one we'd all searched for. His body had somehow become part of a redwood trunk, like the tree had, grown right through him. His face was frozen in a look of surprise, as if he hadn't even had time to be scared. "The forest takes what it wants," Jesse said quietly. "It's been doing this since before my great-grandmother's time." Linda, trying to stay calm and scientific, took samples of a weird black sap that was oozing from the tree cage. The sap moved, on its own, like it was alive. I'd never seen anything like it in all my years as a ranger. The sun was setting early, too early, and the shadows started to move wrong again. But this time was different. This time they moved like they had a purpose. "We need to leave," I said, but as soon as the words left my mouth, the forest changed around us. Vines and branches shot up from the ground, making walls that separated our group. I could hear Linda screaming somewhere to my left and Martin shouting to my right. "Don't shoot!" I yelled, remembering Jesse's warning. But Martin didn't listen. The gunshots echoed through the trees. Then came a sound I'll never forget. The sound of roots ripping out of the ground. Through a gap in the vine wall, I saw Martin, being dragged into the darkness by things that looked like wooden tentacles. His screams stopped suddenly, replaced by horrible crushing noises. Then silence. "Run!" Old Bill's voice came from somewhere ahead. "The watchtower! Get to the watchtower!" I ran as best I could with my bad leg, following the sound of Bill's voice. Branches whipped at my face and the ground itself seemed to try to trip me. I could hear Linda's breathing somewhere close by, and the soft sound of Jesse's moccasins on the forest floor. The old fire watchtower appeared out of the fog like a ghost. We climbed the metal stairs as fast as we could, our feet clanging on, each step Only when we reached the top did I realize Martin wasn't the only one missing. We'd lost Old Bill, too. From the tower's windows, we could see the forest moving below us. Actually moving. Trees bending and swaying without any wind, their branches reaching like arms. And between them, a darkness deeper than night flowed like water, taking shapes that shouldn't exist. "It's hunting us," Linda whispered, her face pressed against the glass. "But why? What did we do?" Jessie touched the window gently. "Look there," she said, pointing to where the darkness seemed thickest. In that spot, two lights glowed like eyes, the color of tree sap in sunlight. They were looking right at us. The tower creaked as something huge moved below. Metal groaned against metal. Linda grabbed my arm again, and this time I was grateful for it. We all watched as the darkness rose up around our safe place, like a tide of shadows coming in. "Harrison," Jessie said, her voice steady despite everything. "There's something you need to know about the Shadow Keeper, something my people have known for generations." But before she could tell me, the tower shuddered like it was caught in an earthquake. Outside the windows, the darkness had taken shape. A massive form made of shadow and bark and moss, with those glowing amber eyes fixed on our tiny shelter. In that moment, looking into those ancient eyes, I understood something terrible. We weren't dealing with some forest creature or angry spirit. This was something older, something that had been here long before humans walked the earth. And it wanted us to know that we were in its home now, its rules, its justice. The tower creaked again, and somewhere in the darkness below, I heard Old Bill's voice start to sing, a strange, sad song that made the shadows pulse like a heartbeat. The watchtower swayed in the darkness like a tree in a storm. Old Bill's strange song faded away, but the shadows still pulsed around us, making the metal walls creak. "It's time you knew the truth," Jessie said, sitting cross-legged on the tower floor. "My people have lived in these forests for thousands of years. We knew about the Shadow Keeper long before the first white settlers came." Linda had her notebook out, her hands shaking as she wrote. Even now, the scientist in her wanted to understand. "What is it?" she asked. "Not what. Who?" Jessie's eyes reflected the amber glow from outside. "Long ago, when the great redwoods were young, my ancestors made a deal with the forest spirits. We would protect certain sacred groves, keep them safe from harm. In return, the Shadow Keeper would sleep, would let humans live nearby in peace." A bang from below made us all jump. Through the floor grating, we could see thick roots climbing the tower's legs like snakes. "But now," Jessie continued, "humans have broken that promise. The new roads, the logging, they're cutting into the sacred spaces. The Shadow Keeper has awakened to protect what's left." Linda pulled out the samples of black sap she'd collected. In the dim light of our lantern, the stuff moved like it was alive. "This isn't normal sap," she said. "Under my microscope, it looks like it's part plant, part animal, and something else, like a network of living shadows." "The Shadow Keeper isn't just one thing," Jessie explained. "It's connected to every tree, every root, every shadow in the forest. When the loggers cut down the old trees, they're not just killing trees, they're cutting pieces out of the Shadow Keeper itself." The tower groaned again. Outside, the massive shape moved closer. In the lantern light, I could see it clearly now. A huge figure made of twisted bark and dark moss, with branches growing from its shoulders like wings. Those glowing eyes stared right at me. "I've seen it before," Old Bill's voice came from the darkness. We all jumped. None of us had seen him come up the tower stairs. He looked older now, tired, with moss growing on his jacket. "Back in '46, when I was still logging, it spared me because I promised to protect the forest. Been trying to make up for my mistakes ever since." "But why show itself now?" I asked. "Why not stay hidden?" "Because tomorrow morning," Bill said heavily, "the logging company is coming to cut down the heart grove. the most sacred place of all. Once that's gone, he shook his head. The Shadow Keeper won't just hide anymore, it'll fight back. As if answering him, the creature outside pressed closer to the tower. Its body seemed to flow like water, like living shadow. The metal walls bent inward with a screech. Linda's scientific calm finally broke. What does it want from us? It's choosing, Jessie said quietly. Choosing who will join the forest consciousness. Like that logger we found. Like what happened to Deputy Martin. The tower's windows fogged up, but not with normal mist. Dark shapes moved in the fog, showing pictures like a movie. Ancient redwoods being cut down, animals fleeing, the forest dying piece by piece. The Shadow Keeper was showing us what humans had done. There's more, Old Bill said, touching the foggy window. The forest remembers everything. The broken promises, the destroyed groves, every tree that ever fell. His hand came away covered in black sap. And now it wants us to understand what it feels like. The tower shuddered again, harder this time. Through the windows, we could see more shapes rising from the darkness below. Smaller versions of the Shadow Keeper, made of bark and shadow, climbing toward us. Harrison, Jessie grabbed my arm. The Shadow Keeper isn't just angry, it's scared. Humans are destroying its home faster than ever before. If we don't stop it. But her words were cut off by a sound like thunder. The tower's metal legs were bending, twisting like paper. The Shadow Keeper's giant hands, made of bark and darkness, were crushing our safe place like a tin can. Old Bill stood up, straightening his old jacket. I know what I have to do, he said. I made a promise all those years ago. Time to keep it. Before any of us could stop him, he opened the tower door and stepped out into the darkness. The last thing we saw was his smile as the shadows wrapped around him like a blanket. The tower stopped shaking, but in the silence that followed we could hear the trees whispering. And now, somehow, I could understand what they were saying. When morning came, nothing looked right. The forest had changed overnight. Trees stood where there hadn't been trees before. Paths went in directions that made no sense. It was like being in a dream, except we were all wide awake. We have to get out, Linda said, checking her compass. The logging crews will be here tomorrow morning. We have to warn them. But her compass wasn't working. The needle spun in circles like it couldn't find north. My ranger's map looked wrong too. None of the landmarks matched what we were seeing. We climbed down from what was left of the tower. The metal stairs were bent and twisted, covered in that strange black sap. As we reached the ground, I noticed something odd about my shadow. It moved a second too slow, like it was thinking about which way to go. This way, I said, pointing to where I thought the road should be. But after walking for an hour, we ended. Up back at the tower. The forest is playing tricks, Jessie said. It's trying to keep us here. We tried again, taking a different path. This time, we found something that made us all stop cold. Deputy Martin was there, or what was left of him. The trees had grown around him like they had with the logger, but he was still alive. His eyes moved, following us. Harrison, he whispered through lips that were turning to bark. It's in my head now. I can feel what it feels. So much anger, so much fear. His voice crackled like breaking twigs. It's choosing. Choosing who will become part of the forest. Linda backed away, her face pale. The fungal network, she said. It's not just in the trees. It's in our heads, too. That's how it's confusing us, changing what we see. I thought about my years as a ranger, about all the trails I'd memorized. Maybe that's it, I said. Maybe we're trying too hard to find our way. Maybe we need to let the forest show us. I closed my eyes and listened, really listened, like I used to do when tracking animals. Under the sound of wind in the leaves, I could hear something else, a kind of heartbeat coming from deep underground. There, I pointed. That's the way, out. I can feel it. Jesse nodded. The Shadow Keeper is letting you sense the paths. But why? We walked again, following that strange pulse I could feel. This time the trees didn't move around us. Instead, they seemed to watch us pass, their branches reaching down like curious fingers. "Look," Linda whispered, pointing ahead. Through the trees, we could see lights, the logging road. We'd found our way out, but something wasn't right. The trees here were different. Older, bigger than any I'd seen before. Their trunks were wider than houses, reaching up into the fog like towers. "The Heart Grove," Jesse said softly. "The Shadow Keeper didn't let us escape. It led us here, to its most sacred place." As if answering her, the black sap began to drip from every tree around us, flowing like tears. The ground shook with that deep heartbeat I'd been following. In the shadows between the ancient trees, amber eyes opened one by one. "It wants us to see," I realized, "to understand what the loggers are about to destroy." A wind picked up, but it blew in the wrong direction, straight down from the sky. The fog cleared for a moment, letting us see just how massive these trees really were. Each one was like a living mountain, thousands of years old. Then we heard it, the sound of trucks in the distance. The logging crew was coming early. Linda grabbed my arm. "Harrison, your shadow." I looked down. My shadow wasn't just moving wrong anymore. It was standing up, peeling itself off the ground like a piece of dark paper, and it wasn't the only one. All around us, shadows were rising, taking shapes that looked almost human. The forest had shown us the way here for a reason. Now we had to choose. Stand with the Shadow Keeper to protect this place, or let these ancient giants fall. Behind us, Deputy Martin's tree-bound voice whispered, "Choose quickly. They're coming." The logging trucks got closer. We could hear their engines rumbling through the fog, smell their diesel fumes mixing with the ancient forest air. I tried to radio them, but all I got was static and strange whispers. "We have to stop them," Linda said. She wasn't shaking anymore. Something had changed in her eyes. She'd seen too much to be afraid now. "They can't cut down these trees. They're too important." I checked my service revolver, more out of habit than anything else. What good would bullets do against living shadows? The ground shook as the first truck pulled up to the Heart Grove. Our own shadows were still standing beside us like dark twins, waiting. Through the trees, we could see the logging crew getting out their equipment. Chainsaws, ropes, hard hats bright yellow in the fog. "Last chance to leave," the crew boss shouted when he saw us. "This grove is coming down today. Orders from the company." That's when Old Bill stepped out of a nearby tree. He wasn't exactly human anymore. His skin had turned to bark, and moss grew in his hair. But his eyes were still kind. "Nobody's cutting down anything today, Tommy," he said to the crew boss. "These trees are older than our whole country. They deserve better than becoming someone's deck furniture." Tommy laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "Bill, we thought you were dead. And what happened to your—" He stopped, finally noticing how Bill had changed. The chainsaws roared to life, their angry buzz echoing through the sacred grove. That's when it happened. The Shadow Keeper appeared, bigger than ever. It rose up behind the ancient trees like a mountain made of darkness, its amber eyes blazing with anger. The logging crew froze. Who could blame them? The creature was as tall as the redwoods now, its body made of twisting shadows and living wood. Roots burst from the ground, crushing their trucks like toys. The chainsaws died, their motors choked with black sap. "Run!" Tommy screamed. But they couldn't. The forest had come alive around them, every shadow reaching, every branch moving. Some of the men were caught by roots, others tangled in suddenly living vines. "Stop!" I shouted, but I wasn't talking to the loggers. I was talking to the Shadow Keeper. "This isn't the way!" Jessie stepped forward, her voice calm in all the chaos. She began to sing in her native language, the same song Old Bill had sung in the tower. The Shadow Keeper paused, its massive head turning toward her. "There's another way," she said between verses. "A new pact, like the old one, but stronger. We can protect these groves together, humans and forest spirits working as one." Linda pulled out her notebook. "The research station. We can move it here. Study the trees, protect them, show people why they're special." "The company won't like that," Tommy said weakly from where he was tangled in vines. "The company will learn to like it," I said, surprising myself with how sure I felt. "Because if they don't, they'll have to explain why their equipment keeps breaking, why their workers keep quitting, why strange shadows follow their trucks home at night." The shadow keeper's eyes fixed on me. I felt it in my head again, that deep, ancient heartbeat. But this time, I understood what it wanted. "We'll be your guardians," I said. "All of us, like old Bill, like Jesse's ancestors. We'll keep your secrets, protect your sacred places. Just give us the chance to prove it." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then old Bill smiled his gentle smile and touched the nearest ancient tree. Black sap ran down its trunk, but this time it didn't look like tears. It looked like writing, the same kind of symbols we'd seen in the moss days ago. "The Shadow Keeper accepts," Jesse translated, "but it wants something in return, a sign of trust." I knew what that meant. I could feel it in my shadow, which was still standing beside me like a waiting friend. "What do I need to do?" "Let it in," old Bill said. "Just a little, like I did. Become part of the forest's memory. But keep your human heart too. Be a bridge between both worlds." I thought about my years as a ranger, about how the forest had helped heal me after Vietnam. Maybe this was why. Maybe I'd been preparing for this moment all along. I held out my hand. My shadow did the same. When our fingers touched, it felt like cool water running up my arm. The forest's heartbeat grew stronger in my mind, and suddenly I could sense every tree, every root, every shadow in the grove. "I understand now," I whispered, and I did. I understood everything. The Shadow Keeper lowered its massive head. The loggers were released, stumbling and running back down the road. Tommy stayed behind, looking at us with wide eyes. "Tell your company," I said, my voice mixing with whispers from the trees. "This grove is protected now. By law, by science, and by things they wouldn't believe." He nodded quickly and backed away. As he drove off, I saw his truck's shadow lingering, behind for just a moment, as if saying goodbye. Linda touched my arm. "Harrison, are you okay?" I smiled. The black sap was moving under my skin now, but it didn't hurt. It felt like belonging. "I'm more than okay. I'm home." Above us, the Shadow Keeper began to fade, melting back into the forest. But I could still feel it watching through every tree, waiting to see if we'd keep our new promise. Old Bill patted my shoulder with his bark-covered hand. "Welcome to the family, Ranger. We've got work to do." 6 months have passed since that day in the Heart Grove. Things are different now, both in the forest and in me. The logging company tried to fight us at first, but after 3 of their bulldozers were found twisted into knots. After shadows followed their bosses home at night, they changed their minds. Now the Heart Grove is protected land, with Linda's research station studying the ancient trees. Jesse became the forest's official protector on paper, teaching the Park Service about the old ways of caring for the land. She says I'm learning. Fast, though sometimes the moss growing on my fingers makes it hard to fill out ranger reports. Old Bill still walks the forest paths. Most days he looks almost normal, but when the fog rolls in thick, his bark-like skin helps him blend right into the trees. He teaches me how to listen to the forest's heartbeat, how to understand what the shadows are saying. Linda's research changed too. She still writes everything down in her notebooks, but now she studies things most scientists wouldn't believe, like how the black sap moves by itself, how the fungus network under the ground carries messages, how shadows can have memories. Deputy Martin's body was never found, But sometimes at night we hear singing from deep in the forest. A voice that sounds like rustling leaves mixed with his old laugh. I think he's happy where he is, part of something bigger than himself. As for me, I'm still a ranger, still walk my trails every day. But now I see things differently. My shadow doesn't always follow where I go. Sometimes it walks beside me or runs ahead to check the paths. The old injury from Vietnam doesn't hurt anymore, though the scars have turned a deep green, like moss on a stone. At night, when the fog rolls in and the ancient trees whisper their secrets, I can feel the shadow keeper watching through my eyes, not with anger anymore, but with hope. Hope that this time, humans will keep their promise. That this time we'll remember that the forest isn't just a resource to use. It's alive, aware, and worthy of protection. Sometimes hikers ask me about the strange shapes they see moving between the trees, or why their shadows sometimes wave at them. I just smile and tell them the forest is happy to see them, because that's what I am now. A bridge between two worlds. Part ranger, part shadow, part ancient memory. And when the fog gets thick and the shadows grow long, I walk among the giant trees and remember how it all began. With a broken research camp, a frightened scientist, and a ranger who learned that some mysteries are meant to be lived, not solved. In the Heart Grove, the oldest redwood still stands tall. Its shadow stretches far beyond what sunlight should allow. And sometimes, if you look closely, you can see amber eyes glowing in its depths. The forest remembers. And now, so do I. The first snowflake wasn't supposed to fall for another month. I watched it drift past my office window at the ranger station, followed by another, then another, until the air was thick with white. Something felt wrong about that snow. Maybe it was the way it fell straight down without any wind, or how the flakes seemed too large, too perfect, like something a kid would cut out of paper. I took a sip from my flask, letting the whiskey warm my insides. The radio crackled to life, breaking the morning silence. "Walker, you there? We've got a situation." Sheriff Murphy's voice was tense, unusual for our normally laid-back morning check-ins. "Go ahead, Frank," I answered, my fingers automatically, moving to touch the hunting knife at my belt, my father's last gift to me before he passed. 3 canoeists missing since yesterday afternoon. Last seen heading toward Blackwater Lake. Their families are raising hell at my office. My stomach tightened. Blackwater Lake was remote, practically untouched. The new Echo Trail had made it accessible to tourists who had no business being there, especially not in October when the weather turned mean. "I'll gather a search party," I said, already reaching for my maps. "Meet me at the station in an hour." While waiting, I studied the maps I knew by heart, marking the most likely routes those canoeists might have taken. The snow was falling harder now, coating the ground. In white, the thermometer outside my window read 28 degrees. Impossibly cold for early October. The first to arrive was Robert Jensen, my young trainee. His cheeks were red from the cold, but his eyes sparkled with that eager-to-please look I'd gotten used to. He was a good kid, reminded me of some of the young soldiers I'd led in Korea, before everything went wrong there. "Mr. Walker," he said, pulling a photo from his breast pocket, his fiancée Sarah's smiling face. "Think we'll find them today?" Before I could answer, the door opened again. Marie Redfeather walked in, wrapped in a worn wool coat, her dark eyes taking in everything. She was the best guide in the area, though I'd never tell her that. Behind her came Dr. Howard Fleming, the university guy who'd been hanging around lately, asking too many questions about local legends. "I brought recording equipment," Fleming announced, patting his bag, "for documentation purposes." Marie shot him a look that could have frozen water. "This isn't one of your research projects, Doctor." Sheriff Murphy arrived last, stamping snow from his boots. He looked like he'd already started drinking, but I couldn't judge. My own flask was a familiar weight in my pocket. I spread the map across my desk. Our missing party is 3 men, all from Minneapolis. They were headed to Blackwater Lake, probably taking this route here. I traced the path with my finger. With this weather moving in, we need to move fast. Marie stepped closer to the window, her reflection overlapping with the frost patterns forming on the glass. "Something's not right about this snow," she said quietly. "My grandfather used to say when winter comes too early, it's because something's calling it." "Let's stick to facts," Fleming cut in, already holding up his recorder. "Weather patterns have been unusual across the region, likely due to—" "Save the lecture," Murphy interrupted. "Those idiots are probably holed up in a cave somewhere waiting to be rescued. Let's get moving." But as we gathered our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marie was right. 20 years as a ranger had taught me to trust my gut, and right. Now it was screaming that something was very wrong in my woods. I checked my father's knife one more time, ran my thumb along its familiar worn handle. The blade had never failed me, not in Korea, not here. I hoped I wouldn't need it, but the way the snow was falling, too quiet, too heavy, made me think otherwise. "Gear up," I ordered, shouldering my pack. "We're heading out in 10 minutes. And bundle up tight. Something tells me it's going to get a lot colder before this is over." Robert adjusted his scarf, grinning like this was just another training exercise. Marie whispered something in her native language that sounded like a prayer. Fleming fiddled with his recorder, and Murphy took a last pull from his own flask. None of us knew it then, but that ordinary October morning was the last normal moment any of us would ever have. The thing that was waiting for us in those ancient pines would make sure of that. The snow crunched under our boots as we followed the shoreline. Every step took us deeper into the wilderness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching us. Not in the normal way. I was used to feeling animals' eyes on me. This was different. "Radio check," I said into my handset. The static that came back was thick with interference. "Getting anything?" Robert asked, adjusting his backpack straps. I shook my head. Must be the weather. But I'd never seen weather mess with radios quite like this. We walked for hours. The snow kept falling, covering our tracks almost as soon as we made them. The cold bit through my thick jacket like it had teeth. Every so often, I'd take a sip from my flask, but even the whiskey didn't seem to warm me up like it usually did. "Look there," Marie called out suddenly. She was pointing to a cluster of birch trees ahead. Something bright red was fluttering from one of the branches. We hurried forward. It was a scarf, caught in the trees like a splash of blood against all the white. Dr. Fleming pulled out his recorder immediately. Red wool scarf discovered at approximately... He checked his watch, but the hands had frozen in place. "That's odd. Over here!" Robert's voice carried from behind a fallen log. We found him standing over fresh tracks in the snow, boot prints, but something was wrong with them. They started normal-sized, then got longer, like someone's feet had been, stretched. "Animal probably walked over them," Murphy said, but he didn't sound convinced. Marie knelt down to look closer. "No animal made these marks." She glanced up at the darkening sky. "We should make camp soon. We don't want to be moving after dark." "These men could be freezing to death," Fleming argued. "We should keep going." I looked at the tracks again, then at the heavy clouds above. Marie's right. We need shelter before night falls. There's a clearing up ahead that should work. We found a spot sheltered by tall pines. The snow had formed deep drifts, so we had to dig out spaces for our tents. Robert worked quickly, humming to himself as he set up his gear. I noticed he kept taking out that photo of his fiancée, looking at it when he thought no one was watching. Murphy helped me gather firewood while Fleming set up his recording equipment around the camp. Marie walked the perimeter, touching trees and muttering to herself. I'd worked with her enough to know she was leaving markers, old tribal signs, to help, guide us back if we got lost. The fire caught quickly, but it didn't seem to give off as much heat as it should. We huddled around it anyway, eating beef jerky and crackers in silence. The forest had gone quiet. No birds, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Just the soft hiss of snow falling on snow. "Tell me about the missing men," Marie said, breaking the silence. "What brought them out here so late in the season?" Murphy pulled out his notebook. "3 guys from the city. Said they wanted to see the real wilderness before winter set in. Left their cars at the South Ranger Station 4 days ago." 4 days? I frowned. "Why weren't we notified sooner?" "They were supposed to be out for a week," Murphy explained. "But one of them was meant to call his wife every night on their satellite phone. When he missed 2 calls in a row, she called it in. A branch cracked in the darkness beyond our fire. We all turned to look, but the shadows between the trees were too thick to see anything. Probably just a deer," Robert said, but he scooted closer to the fire. "That's when we heard it. A voice calling from the darkness. A woman's voice. 'Robert! Robert! Help me!' Robert jumped to his feet, his face going pale. 'Sarah? That's Sarah's voice.' I grabbed his arm before he could run into the dark. 'That's not your fiancée, son. She's hundreds of miles away, remember?' But the voice called again, sounding closer this time. Robert struggled against my grip. 'She sounds scared. I have to help her.' 'Nobody move,' Marie commanded. She threw something into the fire, dried herbs from a pouch at her belt. The flames turned briefly green, and the voice cut off like someone had flipped a switch. We all stared at her, but she just poked the fire with a stick. 'Get in your tents, now. Don't come out until morning, no matter what you hear, and whatever you do, don't answer if something calls your name.' Nobody argued. Maybe it was the way she said it, or maybe it was the unnatural silence that followed that voice. We zipped ourselves into our tents, but I don't think any of us slept. I know I didn't. I lay awake, listening to the snowfall and watching shadows move across my tent wall. They didn't look like tree branches swaying. They looked like long, twisted fingers reaching for us. Just before dawn, I heard Murphy crying in his tent. Not the quiet kind of crying, but deep, broken sobs like his heart was being torn out. When I asked him about it in the morning, he said he hadn't cried, said he'd slept like a baby. But his eyes were red, and when he thought no one was looking, his hands shook as he packed up his tent. Morning brought more snow and a discovery that made my skin crawl. All around our camp, pressed deep into the fresh snow, were footprints. But they weren't animal tracks, and they definitely weren't human. At least, not entirely. They started as normal boot prints near the tents, then stretched longer and longer, like someone's feet had grown as they walked. The final prints were nearly 3 feet long. "Those weren't here last night," Robert said, his voice shaking. He hadn't mentioned hearing his fiancée's voice again, but I noticed he'd stopped taking out her photo. Marie knelt beside one of the prints. Her face was grim as she pulled something from the snow. A single, long finger bone, yellowed with age. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "All of you. About what we're really dealing with." We gathered around the remains of our fire while Marie spoke. She told us about the Wendigo, a spirit that takes over people who've been alone in the wilderness too long, how it makes them hungry for human flesh, how it twists their bodies and fills them with winter's cold. "That's nonsense," Fleming said, but he was recording every word. "There's got to be a rational explanation." "Like what?" Murphy snapped. "What rational explanation is there for those tracks, or that voice last night?" The argument was cut short by a sound echoing across the lake, wood splintering and something heavy hitting ice. We grabbed our gear and ran toward the noise. We found a canoe smashed halfway through the lake's frozen surface. Dark red spots stained the ice around it. I touched one of the stains. It was blood, frozen solid, even though the temperature wasn't nearly cold enough for that. "Look at these marks," I said, pointing to the canoe's side. Deep scratches ran along the wood, like something with massive claws had tried to grab it. Fleming leaned in close with his camera. "Could be bear marks." "Bears don't grab canoes," Marie said, "and they're hibernating by now." A wind picked up, and with it came a storm like I'd never seen. The snow fell so thick and fast we could barely see 10 feet ahead. The temperature dropped so quickly our water bottles froze solid. "There's an old trapper's cabin near here," I shouted over the wind. "We need to get there before we freeze." We fought through the storm for almost an hour before finding the cabin. It was barely standing, but its walls still blocked the wind. As we huddled inside, I noticed Murphy staring at our supplies with an odd look in his eyes. The cabin had one room with an old wood stove. While Robert got a fire going, I found a journal wedged between the logs of one wall. It was dated 1879, written by someone named William Hayes. "Listen to this," I said, reading, "by flashlight. Day 47. The snow won't stop. Jenkins ate the last of our food yesterday. He looks at us strange now, like we're meat. His teeth seem longer. The cold doesn't bother him anymore." "Stop," Murphy said suddenly. His face had gone pale. "I don't want to hear any more." But I kept reading. Day 52. Jenkins is gone. We heard screaming in the night. When we found him, he wasn't Jenkins anymore. His legs were wrong, twisted. He was eating. I stopped reading. The rest was too horrible. "We need to leave," Marie said. "Now." "Are you crazy?" Fleming gestured at the storm outside. "We'll die out there." "We'll die in here," she answered, pointing to the ceiling. We looked up. Ice crystals were forming inside the cabin, spreading across the wooden beams in impossible patterns. They moved like living things, reaching toward us even though there was no water source they could have grown from. "The meat," Robert said suddenly. "Where's all our meat?" We checked our supplies. Every package of beef jerky, every energy bar with protein, gone. In their place, we found torn wrappers and strange, deep bite marks in the wooden floor. Murphy turned away, but not before I saw him wipe something dark from his mouth. When he thought we weren't looking, he slipped a handful of frozen meat into his pocket. I noticed his fingernails seemed longer, and his breath didn't steam in the cold air like ours did. That night, we took turns keeping watch. During my shift, I heard Murphy whispering in the dark corner where he slept. He was talking to someone who wasn't there, begging his dead mother to make the hunger stop. I gripped my father's knife and watched the ice crystals spread across the walls, forming patterns that looked like screaming faces. Outside, something moved through the storm on legs too long to be human, calling out to us with voices we knew couldn't be real. None of us said it, but we all knew. We weren't searching for missing people anymore. We were being hunted by something that used to be human, and Murphy was starting to change too. I woke to the sound of chewing. In the gray morning light filtering through the cabin's dirty windows, I saw Murphy crouched in the corner. He was hunched over something, eating with quick, desperate bites. His shoulders looked wrong, too sharp like his bones were trying to push through his skin. "Frank?" I called softly, my hand moving to my knife. He turned, and my blood went cold. His face was smeared with raw meat, and his eyes had a silvery sheen like ice. His teeth seemed longer, sharper. "I'm so hungry, Tom," he whispered. "Nothing helps. I eat and eat, but I can't get warm." The others woke up then. Robert let out a small gasp. Marie moved slowly, like she was trying not to startle a dangerous animal. "Where did you get that meat, Frank?" I asked, though I was afraid I knew the answer. He looked down at the bloody mess in his hands. "Found it. In the snow. Had to eat. It? Had to." "That's not possible," Fleming said, his voice shaking. "Raw meat would be frozen solid in this cold." Murphy's hands were covered in blood that should have been frozen, but wasn't. His fingernails had grown into long, curved points. Overnight. "We need to tie him up," Marie said quietly. Murphy stood up too fast, his movements jerky like a puppet with tangled strings. "No, you don't understand. I can hear them now. The missing ones. They're close. So close." He ran for the door before we could stop him. When we followed his tracks in the snow, they started normal but gradually got longer, deeper. like his legs were stretching with each step. "We have to find him," Robert said. "No." Marie grabbed his arm. "We have to find the missing men first, before he does." We searched through the morning, following Murphy's twisted tracks until they disappeared in fresh snow. The cold was worse than ever. It felt like the winter itself was hunting us, trying to freeze us from the inside out. Then we found the first body. He was standing upright in a small clearing, frozen solid. His face was twisted in terror, frost coating his open eyes. But the worst part was how he was positioned, perfectly balanced on his feet, like he'd been running when the cold caught him. "No one freezes like that naturally." "David Chen," Fleming read from the ID in the man's wallet. "One of our missing canoeists." "Don't touch him," Marie warned, but Fleming was already reaching for the body. As soon as his fingers touched the frozen man's coat, there was a sharp, cracking sound. The body began to tip forward. I lunged to catch it, but I was too slow. It shattered on the ground like glass. Inside, where organs should have been, there was only solid ice. Robert threw up in the snow. Fleming dropped his recorder, his hands shaking. The temperature around us dropped so fast it hurt to breathe. "Look," Marie pointed to the trees. Ice was forming on the branches, spreading like frost on a window. But this frost made patterns. Hungry, reaching hands and twisted faces. The ice spread faster as we watched, crackling as it grew. "The temperature," Fleming whispered, checking his thermometer. "It's impossible. We should be dead at this temperature." A howl echoed through the trees. Not quite animal, not quite human. It sounded like Murphy's voice, but wrong, like it was being played backward through a broken speaker. "He's hunting the others," Marie said. "The Wendigo wants to feed." "This isn't happening," Fleming kept saying, backing away from the shattered body. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. I'd seen a lot of strange things in these woods over the years, but nothing like this. The ice was spreading across the ground now, forming patterns that looked like words in a language I didn't want to understand. "We have to stop him," I said, gripping my father's knife tighter. "Before he finds the others." "How?" Robert asked. His breath came out in clouds that froze and shattered like glass. "How do we stop something like that?" Marie pulled out a small pouch of herbs and what looked like an old lighter. "Fire," she said. "We need fire. It's the only way to melt a Wendigo's heart." Another howl split the air, closer this time. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something tall and thin moving on legs that bent the wrong way. It might have been Murphy once, but not anymore. "Run," I said, and we ran. Behind us, Murphy's new voice called out our names one by one, using the voices of people we loved to beg us to stop, to wait, to come back. But we didn't stop. We couldn't, because we all knew that if we did, we'd end up like that frozen man, shattered and hollow with nothing but winter's hunger where our hearts used to be. We ran until our lungs burned from the freezing air. Through the trees, we spotted a dark opening in a rocky hillside, a cave. "In there," I gasped. "We need shelter." Fleming stumbled in first, followed by Robert. Marie hesitated at the entrance, touching strange marks carved into the stone. "These are warnings," she said. "Old ones. They tell people to stay away." Another howl echoed through the forest, closer now. We had no choice but to go inside. Our flashlights showed a tunnel leading down. The walls were covered in ice, but not normal ice. It formed patterns like frozen hands reaching out. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Fleming pulled out, his recorder, his hands shaking. "Cave discovered at..." He checked his watch again, but the hands were still frozen. "Something's wrong with the air in here. It feels heavy." He was right. Each breath felt like drinking ice water. Our lights reflected off the walls in weird ways, making shadows dance like people running away. "Listen," Robert whispered. From deeper in the cave came a sound like someone crying. No, like many people crying all at once. "It's trying to trick us again," Marie warned, but Fleming was already walking toward the sound. "This is incredible," he said, holding up his recorder. "The acoustics in here are impossible. I have to document this." "Stop," Marie grabbed his arm. "Those aren't real voices." But Fleming pulled away. He walked farther down the tunnel, muttering to himself about sound waves and scientific explanations. The crying got louder. Then we saw it. A tall, thin shape in the darkness. It might have been Murphy once, but now its arms and legs were too long, bent in extra places. Ice crystals grew from its skin like a frozen suit of armor. Where its eyes should have been, there were only deep holes filled with swirling snow. Fleming screamed. The thing that used to be Murphy opened its mouth, too wide, full of teeth like icicles, and breathed out a cloud of freezing mist. The mist hit Fleming first. Ice crystals formed on his skin, in his hair. He tried to run, but his legs were already freezing. We watched in horror as frost spread across his eyes, down his throat as he gasped for air. "Help!" he wheezed, reaching toward us. Then the ice reached his lungs. Fleming's frozen body fell backward, shattering like the first victim we'd found. The Wendigo, I couldn't think of it as Murphy anymore, reached down with long, clawed fingers and picked up the pieces. "Run!" I shouted, pushing Robert and Marie back the way we'd come. We ran through the tunnels, taking turns at random. The Wendigo followed, its long legs letting it move faster than anything that size should. It called to us, using Fleming's voice now, begging for help. "This way." Marie pointed to a smaller tunnel. We squeezed through just as the Wendigo's claws swiped at us. The tunnel led to a larger cave. What we saw there made us stop cold. The walls were lined with ice that looked like glass, and frozen inside were faces, dozens of them, all twisted. In fear, years of missing people preserved like insects in amber. "Tom!" Marie's scream snapped me back. The Wendigo had grabbed her leg through the tunnel entrance, pulling her back. I slashed at its arm with my father's knife. The blade barely scratched its icy skin, but it let go. Marie scrambled away, her leg bleeding where its claws had cut. "The tunnels loop around," she said through gritted teeth. "It's trying to hurt us deeper in." "Why?" Robert asked. "Why doesn't it just kill us?" "Because it's not just hunting us," Marie said, wrapping a bandage around her leg. "It's choosing, looking for the one it wants to change next. Like it changed Murphy." A horrible thought hit me. Murphy was drinking earlier than usual that morning. Said he was cold, started eating raw meat. The Wendigo. It picked him first because he was already hungry, Marie finished. Already had an empty space inside where winter could get in. The Wendigo's cry echoed through the caves, closer now. Marie pulled out her herbs and lighter. "Fire," she said again. "We have to melt its heart. But we need something stronger than this." I touched my flask, still half full of whiskey. "Will this help?" She nodded. "Robert, give me your scarf. We can make torches." But before we could move, the temperature dropped again. Ice spread across the cave floor like cracks in glass. The Wendigo was coming, and somewhere in the darkness another voice started calling, Sarah's voice, begging Robert to help her. When I looked at him, his eyes had that same silvery sheen I'd seen in Murphy's that morning. The hunger was spreading, and we were running out of time. The deeper we went into the caves, the stranger they became. The ice-covered walls didn't look natural anymore. They formed archways and tunnels that seemed built by something with a plan. A horrible plan. "Robert," I said quietly, "give me the photo of Sarah." His hands shook as he pulled it from his pocket. The edges were frosted over, and his fingertips left trails of ice on the paper. "I can still hear her," he whispered. His breath wasn't making clouds anymore. "She needs me." Marie grabbed the photo and threw it into her torch flame. Robert screamed and lunged for it, but I held him back. As the photo burned, the voice calling his name faded away. "Listen to me," Marie said, holding Robert's face between her hands. "That's not Sarah. Sarah is safe at home. This thing is trying to make you hungry for something you can't have. That's how it gets in." A crash echoed through the tunnel behind us. The Wendigo was getting closer. We ran deeper into the cave system, our torch flames casting wild shadows on the walls. Then we found the chamber. It was huge, like a frozen cathedral. Massive icicles hung from the ceiling like teeth. In the center stood what looked like a throne, made of ice, and on it sat the thing that used to be Murphy. It had grown even taller, its head almost touching the cavern roof. Antlers of ice sprouted from its skull, and its skin had turned blue-white like deep winter sky. But the worst part was what lay at its feet. The second missing canoeist, still alive, but barely. The Wendigo had frozen him from the feet up, saving him to eat later. "Please," the man whimpered. "Help me." The Wendigo's head snapped toward us. It stood up, unfolding like a tree growing in fast motion. When it moved, ice spread out from its feet in crackling waves. "Murphy," I shouted, trying to find any trace of the man I knew. "Frank, you have to fight this." It answered with Fleming's voice. "Such fascinating data. We must document everything." Then it switched to Murphy's voice, but wrong, like it was coming through broken ice. "So hungry, Tom. Won't you join us?" Marie pulled out the last of her herbs. "The torches. We have to." But the Wendigo moved faster than we could believe. Its arm stretched across the chamber like rubber, grabbing Marie and throwing her against the wall. I heard bones crack as she hit the ice. "No!" I ran to her, but Robert was faster. The cold didn't seem to bother him anymore as he helped her up. Marie pressed her lighter into my hand, leaving bloody fingerprints on it. "The heart," she gasped. "Has to be. The heart." The Wendigo loomed over us. Up close, I could see through its ice crystal skin to the hollow space where its heart should have been. There was something in there, something small and blue, pulsing like a frozen star. I grabbed my flask and father's knife. The Wendigo's claws raked my shoulder as I dodged under its reach. The pain was instant, horrible, like being stabbed with icicles. "Robert!" I yelled. "Help me!" But Robert stood still, frost creeping up his arms. The hunger was taking him. Behind him, Marie wasn't moving. The Wendigo knocked me down. As I hit the ground, my flask spilled open, splashing whiskey across the ice. An idea hit me. I ripped a strip from my shirt and wrapped it around my father's knife, soaked it in whiskey. The Wendigo reached for me with its long, twisted fingers. "You want to feed?" I shouted. "Come and get me." It lunged. I rolled aside, striking the lighter. The knife burst into flame just as the Wendigo's claws sank into my leg. The pain was unbelievable, but I had my chance. I stabbed up with all my strength, driving the burning knife into the hollow space in its chest. The blade hit that blue, pulsing thing, the Wendigo's frozen heart. The scream that came out of it wasn't human or animal. It was the sound of ice cracking, of winter itself breaking apart. The Wendigo thrashed, trying to pull away, but I held on. Ice spread up my arms, numbing them, but I pushed harder. The heart began to melt. The Wendigo's body started cracking, blue light pouring from the splits in its skin. It tried to breathe its freezing mist at me, but the heat from the burning knife was too much. "Robert!" I screamed. "The torches! Now!" Something of the real Robert must have been fighting the hunger because he snapped out of his daze. He threw both lit torches at the Wendigo. They stuck in the cracks of its melting body. The creature that had been Murphy threw back its head and roared. Its antlers shattered. Its long limbs began to drip and break apart. The blue light got brighter and brighter until I had to close my eyes. Then came the sound of 1,000 panes of glass breaking all at once. When I opened my eyes, the Wendigo was gone. Where it had stood was a puddle of melting ice, and in the middle, Murphy's badge. Just his badge, nothing else. The cave started shaking. The ice walls were cracking, the ceiling coming down. "We have to get out," I shouted. I pulled Marie to her feet. She was alive, barely. Robert helped me carry her as we ran. Behind us, the cave collapsed, taking with it all those faces in the walls, all those years of winter's hunger. We barely made it out before the whole hillside fell in. As we lay in the snow, catching our breath, I noticed something strange. The snow had stopped falling. For the first time in days, I felt warm sunlight on my face. But Robert wouldn't look at it. He stared at his hands, watching frost melt from his fingertips, and I knew he was still hearing Sarah's voice, still feeling that endless winter hunger. Some kinds of cold, once they get inside you, never really go away. I woke up in the hospital, 3 days later. The doctors said I had severe frostbite and hypothermia, but I'd live. They didn't mention the claw marks on my leg and shoulder. Maybe they couldn't see them anymore. Marie was in the bed next to mine, her ribs wrapped in bandages. She was alive, but she wouldn't talk about what happened in the cave. Not to me, not to anyone. Robert wasn't so lucky. They found him wandering in the woods 2 days after we got out. His fiancée Sarah flew in to see him, but he wouldn't let her in the room. Said he wasn't hungry anymore, but couldn't trust himself around people he loved. The official report called it a tragic accident. They said Murphy got lost in the storm, said the missing canoeists died from exposure, the frozen one we found. Animal attacks, they wrote. The collapsed cave? Natural causes. They gave me Murphy's badge in a little box. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear it whisper. I tried to go back to work, but everything felt wrong. The woods didn't feel like home anymore. Every snapped twig made me jump. Every cold breeze reminded me of that icy breath. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the hunger. It started small, wanting my steaks rarer, feeling cold all the time. My flask of whiskey doesn't warm me up like it used to. Nothing does. This morning, I looked in the mirror and saw something strange in my eyes. A silvery shine, like moonlight on ice. My teeth look different too. Sharper. And when I breathe out, my breath doesn't make clouds anymore. I've requested a transfer to the northernmost post they have. Somewhere the winters are long and dark. Somewhere people don't go looking for missing hikers. I tell myself it's because I need a fresh start. But deep down, I know the truth. Winter got inside me in that cave, and now it's hungry. I've left this account in my cabin along with my father's knife. If you're reading it, you're probably looking for answers about missing people. Maybe you've heard strange voices in the snow. Maybe you've seen tracks that don't make sense. My advice? Run. Run as far south as you can. Because winter is coming early this year, and this time, I'm not fighting it anymore. Found among the personal effects of Thomas Walker, who disappeared during an early blizzard in October 2025. The knife, mentioned, was not recovered with the document. Search parties reported hearing familiar voices calling from the storm, but no body was ever found. I never wanted to bring Kate to work with me that summer. Not because I didn't want to spend time with my 16-year-old daughter, but because something in my gut told me the mountains were different this year. The rain hadn't stopped for weeks, and the animals were acting strange. After 20 years as head ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park, you develop a sense for these things. But I had no choice, not after the phone call from her school principal about the fighting. "Dad, this is stupid," Kate said for the 100th time as we pulled up to the ranger station. The rain hammered our truck like bullets and lightning split the sky. I'm not a kid anymore. I can take care of myself at home. I turned off the engine and looked at her. In the glow of the dashboard lights, she looked so much like her mother it hurt. Same stubborn chin, same fierce eyes. We both know that's not true, especially after what happened at school. "He deserved it," she mumbled, staring out the window at the dark trees. Before I could respond, headlights cut through the rain. A newer model truck pulled up, and out jumped Marcus Turner, our newest ranger. Even through the downpour, I could see the excited grin on his face. He was carrying his fancy recording equipment, probably hoping to catch some wolf howls for his research. "Chief Powell," he called out, splashing through puddles. "You're not going to believe what I found up on the East Trail." I sighed, grabbing my rain gear. "Kate, head inside and help Janet with the visitor logs." She rolled her eyes but went. At least she listened sometimes. Marcus led me to his truck and pulled out a map. "Look at these tracks I found." He pointed to some photos. "They're like nothing I've seen before. Too big for a bear, and the stride pattern. It's almost like whatever made them was walking on two legs." I was about to tell him he was probably looking at rain-warped bear prints when my radio crackled. "Chief?" It was Janet from dispatch. "We've got 3 separate reports of aggressive coyote behavior near Campground B, and..." She hesitated. "The hikers are saying something weird. They all mentioned the coyotes were moving in formation, like they were being directed." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain. I'd seen plenty of strange things in these mountains, but coordinated coyote attacks? That was new. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. He pulled out his audio recorder and played a sound that made my skin crawl. It started like a normal wolf howl, but transformed into something else, something that sounded almost like words. The rest of that day was a blur of incident reports and worried campers. Kate, surprisingly helpful at the front desk, noticed something in the visitor logs that I'd missed. Over the past month, dozens of hikers had reported feeling watched on the trails. Not just normal woods awareness, but an intense sensation of being stalked. I was reviewing these reports when Elizabeth Winters showed up. She introduced herself as a wildlife biologist studying coyote populations, but something about her seemed off. She knew too much about the incidents, asked too many specific questions about tracks and behavior patterns. That evening, as the darkness fell early under the storm clouds, we got the call that would change everything. 2 hikers were missing near Rainy Mountain, and their last radio transmission mentioned human-like howls and eyes in the trees. I gathered my team for a search party, trying to ignore the way the thunder seemed to carry echoes of those strange howls Marcus had recorded. As we prepared to head out, I caught Kate watching from the window, her face pale in a flash of lightning. For a moment, I saw real fear in her eyes, the same look I'd seen at her mother's funeral. Something was wrong in these mountains. I'd spent my whole life finding rational explanations for the strange and unknown, but as we headed into the darkness that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to discover something that defied explanation. And I was right. God help me, I was right. The search for the missing hikers took us deep into the darkest part of the forest. Our flashlight beams cut through the rain, but the shadows seemed to move in ways they shouldn't. Marcus kept checking his recording equipment, muttering about interference. We found their campsite just after midnight. I've seen plenty of bear attacks in my time, but this was different. The tent wasn't just torn, it was taken apart. The poles were snapped at exactly the same points, and the supplies were sorted into neat piles. Bears don't do that. Nothing does that. "Dad," Kate's voice crackled through my radio. She was supposed to be safe back at the station. "Something weird is happening here. All the dogs in the nearby campgrounds are going crazy. They're all barking at the same spot in the trees, but there's nothing there." I told her to stay inside and lock the doors. That's when Marcus called me over to his equipment. "Listen to this," he said, hands shaking as he pressed play. What I heard made my blood run cold. It was like a wolf's howl, but it had words in it. Not clear words, but enough to make you sure you weren't imagining it. The next morning, Elizabeth Winters was waiting at the station. This time, she had photos spread across my desk. Similar incidents from all across the Appalachian Mountains. Destroyed camps, strange tracks, and stories of creatures that walked like men but moved like wolves. "You think I'm crazy," she said, watching my face. "That's fine. But explain this." She pointed to a photo of tracks in mud. They started as wolf prints, then halfway through, they changed. The back paws stayed the same, but the front ones, they looked like hands. Kate had been quiet all morning, sorting through old visitor reports. "Dad," she called out, her voice steady but scared. "This isn't new. People have been reporting weird things here for years. They just didn't want to sound crazy. That's when Harold Jenkins showed up. He was an old hunting guide, the kind who knew every tree in these mountains." He took one look at Elizabeth's photos and went pale. "My grandfather," he said slowly, "he saw them, back in 22. Nobody believed him, but he wrote it all down." He pulled out a worn leather journal, the pages yellow with age. "They ain't wolves, and they ain't men. There's something in between. And they're smart, too smart." I wanted to dismiss it all. 20 years of ranger training told me there had to be a logical explanation. But then we found the deer. They were arranged in a perfect circle around the ranger station, at least 12 of them. Each one had been killed the same way, with the same marks. And in the center of the circle was a ranger's hat, one that had gone missing from a night patrol last month. Marcus insisted on setting up cameras. Elizabeth helped, him showing him the best spots based on her research. I kept Kate close, not letting her out of my sight. The rain kept falling, and the shadows kept moving. That night, I was doing paperwork when Kate screamed. I ran to her room in the station's living quarters, gun drawn. She was at the window, pointing at something I couldn't see. "There was a hand," she whispered. "Not a normal hand. It had claws and fur, but it was shaped like a person's hand. It was right there, Dad. Right there on the glass." I didn't see it, but I saw the marks it left. 5 perfect claw lines in the wood beneath the window. The radio crackled. Marcus's voice came through, broken and terrified. "Chief, you need to see this. By the old fire tower. They're watching us, and they know we're watching them." The rain pounded harder, and somewhere in the darkness, something howled. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a man, and it was getting closer. When we got to the fire tower where Marcus was waiting, everything went wrong. Our trucks wouldn't start. Someone, or something, had cut the fuel lines. Not torn or chewed through them, but cut them clean, like they knew exactly where to strike. "They're learning," Elizabeth said quietly. "They've been watching us, figuring out how we work." The radio only gave us static now, even though it had been fine that morning. We were stuck here, and the sun was setting. Kate stayed close to me, and I could feel her trembling. "Look," Marcus whispered, pointing to the trees. In the fading light, we saw them. Dozens of small animals, squirrels and rabbits, all sitting perfectly still, all facing us. Like they were watching. Like they were waiting. That's when Harold told us the truth. "My grandfather didn't just see these creatures," he said, his voice shaking. "He caught one. Him and a group of hunters. They did things to it. Tried to understand it. But it was smarter than they thought. It got away, but not before." He stopped, looking sick. "Not before they made it different. Changed it somehow. These ones we're seeing now. They're its children. And they remember what humans did." The creatures showed themselves that night. It started with the power going out at the station. The backup generator failed too, even though we'd checked it that morning. Then came the storm, the biggest one yet. Lightning flashed, and I saw it, standing right there in the open. It was tall, taller than any man, with a wolf's head but a body that stood upright. Its eyes glowed yellow in the dark, and when lightning flashed again, I saw more shapes moving behind it. A whole pack. Marcus tried to reach his truck to get the satellite phone. We told him not to go, but he didn't listen. He made it halfway across the parking lot before they took him. We heard his scream cut off suddenly. Then silence. Then something worse. Sounds that were almost words, like they were trying to talk to him. An hour later, they brought back his recording equipment, set it neatly on the station steps. When we played it back, we heard Marcus crying, then strange growling sounds that seemed to be asking questions. Elizabeth spent hours listening to the recording. "They're organized," she said. "They have a language, a hierarchy. The big one we saw, it's their leader. And it's not just hunting us, it's testing us." Kate hadn't said much, but now she spoke up. "They're always watching, even when we can't see them. I can feel them, like they're waiting for something specific." Harold pulled me aside then, his face gray. He had more pages from his grandfather's journal, ones he'd kept hidden. "They don't just want food," he whispered. "They're looking for something else. Your girl, the way she says she can sense them. Has she always been different? Special?" Before I could answer, we heard Marcus's voice outside, calling for help. But Marcus was gone. We all knew that. This voice, it wasn't him anymore. It was something using his voice, trying to trick us. The rain kept falling, and in the darkness outside, yellow eyes watched and waited. They had us trapped, and they were just getting started. "Dad," Kate said, her voice strange and distant. "I need to tell you something. About Mom. About what she could do." But before she could finish, the windows exploded inward, and the night erupted into chaos. Glass flew everywhere as the windows shattered. We dropped to the floor, covering our heads. The wind and rain poured in, along with something else. A smell like wet dogs, but stronger, wilder. "The stream!" Harold shouted, over the storm. "We need to get to the stream. They won't cross moving water when it's raining." We ran. What else could we do? Kate grabbed the old fire tower maps while Elizabeth snatched her research. The creatures crashed through the station behind us, but they weren't rushing. They were herding us, like wolves driving sheep. Through the rain, we found Marcus. He was alive, but different. His eyes were wide and empty, and he kept mumbling the same things over and over. What they showed me. What they made me see. That's when we heard it. A howl that turned into words. Real words this time, clear as day. "Give us the girl." I pulled Kate closer. Harold looked at us, then at the shapes moving in the darkness. "I have to tell you something," he said. "My grandfather, what they did to that creature, they didn't just study it. They made it breed with wolves. They were trying to make something they could control. But it got smart. Too smart. And now," he looked at Kate, "now they want someone who can understand them. Someone like her." "Mom could hear them too," Kate said quietly. "She used to tell me stories about the wolves that could talk. I thought they were just stories." Elizabeth stepped forward. "We need to split up. Give me the research. I'll lead them away while you get to the stream." Before we could stop her, she ran into the trees, waving her papers and shouting. The creatures followed, their shapes moving like shadows through the rain. But not all of them. Some stayed, watching us with those glowing eyes. We made it halfway to the stream when Harold stopped. "I can't run anymore," he wheezed. "My leg's giving out, but I can buy you time." He pulled out his grandfather's journal. "Hey," he shouted at the creatures. "Remember this? Remember what my family did to you?" The shapes in the darkness stopped, turned. Harold met my eyes. "Get them to the stream, Powell. And Kate, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what my family started." Then he ran, waving the journal, and the creatures followed him. We heard his scream a few minutes later. The stream was ahead, swollen with rain. But between us and safety stood the biggest creature I'd ever seen. 9 feet tall at least, with silver streaks in its dark fur, the Alpha. It spoke. The words were rough, like rocks being ground together, but clear. "She belongs with us. She can hear, she can understand, like the other one." The other one? I asked. As if in answer, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Elizabeth. But not Elizabeth anymore. Her face was changing, stretching into something between human and wolf. Her eyes glowed yellow. "It doesn't hurt," she said, her voice strange and growling. "The change. It feels like coming home." She held out her hand to Kate. My daughter stood there, rain streaming down her face, looking at Elizabeth with a mixture of fear and something else. Understanding. That's when Marcus snapped out of his daze. With a scream, he pulled out his emergency flare gun and fired. The red light exploded between us and the creatures, and everything happened at once. The Alpha roared. The pack attacked. I grabbed Kate and ran for the stream, my feet slipping in the mud. The water roared ahead of us, and behind us came the sounds of running feet, some on 4 legs, some on 2. We jumped. The stream's cold water hit us like a punch. Kate and I went under, but we held onto each other tight. The current pulled us, tumbling and spinning, but the creatures didn't follow. Through the rushing water, I heard their howls of frustration. The rescue team found us 2 miles downstream, clinging to a fallen tree. They found Marcus's body, too, washed up on the bank. Of Elizabeth, there was no trace. They searched for days, but it was like she'd vanished into the forest itself. I wrote the official report the way they wanted it. Mountain lion attack. Mass panic. Natural causes. Who would believe the truth anyway? But that wasn't the end. Not really. A week after we got home, I found Kate's journal hidden under her bed. The last few pages made my hands shake. Mom told me the truth before she died, about why she spent so much time in the woods, about what she could hear out there. She said it would happen to me too, when I was ready. That's why I got into those. Fights at school, I could hear things, animal things, wolf things, and now I can't stop hearing them. I started noticing other changes. Kate sleepwalking, leaving muddy footprints by her window, her eyes catching the light in strange ways, like a cat's. She'd sit by her window at night, staring into the darkness, sometimes making soft sounds that weren't quite human. One night I couldn't sleep. The rain was back, drumming on the roof like fingers. I heard Kate's door open, her quiet footsteps on the stairs. This time I followed her. She walked into the woods behind our house like she knew exactly where she was going. The rain didn't seem to bother her. She moved differently now. Graceful, sure-footed in the dark. At the edge of the trees, someone was waiting. In the dim light, I recognized Elizabeth's shape, but changed. Her body was longer, her face different. She wasn't fully human anymore, but she wasn't fully creature either. She was something in between. Kate turned to look at me then. Her eyes glowed soft yellow in the darkness. Not hostile, not frightened, just different. "Dad," she said softly, "I have to know. About what I am. About what Mom was." "Kate," I started to say, but Elizabeth spoke, her voice a growl and a whisper. "She'll be safe with us. Like I am. Like her mother should have been." I stood there in the rain, watching my daughter. Seeing her mother in her face. Understanding now why my wife had spent so many nights walking in these woods. Why she'd always said the mountains were in her blood. "Will you come back?" I asked Kate. She smiled, and for a moment she was just my little girl again. "Of course, I'm not leaving. I'm just learning who I am." She turned and walked into the trees with Elizabeth. But she did come back, like she promised. She always comes back. That was 2 months ago. Kate still lives with me, still goes to school, but some nights, when the rain falls hard and the moon is bright, I hear howls in the darkness. Not scary ones anymore. They sound like family voices, calling to each other across the mountains. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I'm starting to understand what they're saying. I should have known something was wrong when all the birds stopped singing. It was my 30th summer at Mesa Verde National Park, and I'd never seen the land so thirsty. The earth cracked like broken pottery beneath my boots as I walked the trail to the cliff dwellings that morning. The sun wasn't even up yet, but I could feel the heat building. We were in the worst drought anyone could remember, and the dusty air made my throat itch. "Morning, Ranger Talbot." Professor Wilson waved from the excavation site, his white hair wild in the morning breeze. He looked excited, like a kid on Christmas morning. "You're just in time. We found something." I took my heart medication before heading over. Doctor's orders, though I hated being reminded that I wasn't as young as I used to be. My name's Richard Talbot, and at 55, I'd spent more than half my life protecting these ancient ruins. The old pueblos felt more like home than my own house sometimes. The excavation team had gathered around a small opening in one of the cliff-dwelling walls. They'd been working for weeks to carefully uncover new chambers, but something felt different today. The air was too still, like the whole canyon was holding its breath. "Look at this, Richard." Professor Wilson pointed his flashlight into the chamber. "We've never seen anything like it." I peered inside, and that's when I saw it. A clay vessel, small enough to hold in 2 hands, covered in symbols I'd never seen before in all my years studying these ruins. The pot sat alone on a stone shelf, perfectly preserved. "We should document everything before we move it," I said, but Wilson was already reaching for it. That's when I heard her voice. "Wait, Diana." Yazzie, our newest ranger, stood in the doorway. She was breathing hard like she'd run all the way from the visitor center. Something in her eyes made me uneasy. Diana was usually so calm, but now she looked scared. "Those markings," she said quietly. "My grandmother told me about them. They're warnings." Wilson laughed, already lifting the vessel. "My dear, these are just decorative patterns. We've cataloged hundreds of similar—" The pot's lid shifted in his hands, and a puff of reddish dust escaped into the air. I remember thinking how strange it was that the dust moved against the wind, swirling like it had a mind of its own. It formed shapes for just a second. I could have sworn I saw a face in it before dispersing into the morning light. That's when we heard it. A sound like distant flutes coming from deep within the empty chambers behind us. Everyone froze. Wilson's camera guy, who'd been filming the whole thing, slowly lowered his equipment. "Did anyone else hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, then noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dust from the pot hadn't settled on the ground like it should have. Instead, it had formed a perfect circle around us, like something had drawn it there with careful fingers. Diana stepped back, crossing herself. "The old stories," she muttered. "They're all true. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years protecting these ruins. But as I watched that dust circle slowly begin to move, stretching into the shape of what looked like human footprints, I knew we'd just opened something that should have stayed sealed. The birds had been trying to warn us. Now I understood why. They'd gone quiet. Something ancient was awake, and it was watching us. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind kept making strange sounds outside my window, like someone whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I got up to check the security cameras, something I'd done thousands of times before, but tonight felt different. The screens showed the usual views: empty hallways, the museum storage room, the visitor center. But then I saw something that made me sit up straight. A shadow moved across the museum wall, a tall, human shape. But when I switched to another camera to get a better look, there was nobody there. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Lisa, one of the night guards. "Ranger Talbot," she said, her voice shaking. "You need to come to the storage room. Now." I grabbed my keys and flashlight, trying to ignore the way my heart was beating too fast. When I got to the storage room, Lisa was standing in the doorway, as pale as a ghost. "I was doing my rounds," she whispered, "and I saw—well, look for yourself." The storage room held hundreds of artifacts from the ruins, pottery, tools, ancient blankets, but something was wrong. Every single item had been moved. They were arranged on the floor in a massive pattern, like a human figure with its arms spread wide. "Nobody's been in here," Lisa said. "The door was locked. I had the only key." I checked my watch, 3:27 a.m. The items were heavy. It would have taken hours to move them all, and the security cameras hadn't shown anyone entering. My radio crackled. "Richard." It was Diana. "The spring by the dig site. You need to see this." The spring had been there forever, feeding a small stream that ran through the canyon, but when we got there, it was bone dry. Not just low, like you'd expect in a drought, completely empty, as if something had sucked out every last drop. That's when Diana told me everything. "In my culture," she said quietly, "there are stories about beings called skinwalkers. They can change their shape, make you see things that aren't real. But they're more than just stories." She pointed to some marks in the dust. "Look, the tracks started as animal prints, maybe a coyote, but halfway through they changed into human footprints." "My grandmother taught me the signs," Diana continued. "The missing water, the moving shadows, the way the dust moves against the wind. Something was trapped in that vessel we found, Mr. Talbot. Something old, something hungry. I wanted to tell her it was just stories, that there had to be a logical explanation. But then we heard Professor Wilson shouting from the dig site. We found him standing in front of the newly opened chamber, talking excitedly, to absolutely nobody. His flashlight beam bounced off the empty walls as he gestured at thin air. "Professor?" I called out. "Who are you talking to?" He turned, surprised. "Why, I was just discussing the findings with Dr. Thompson. He was right here." Diana grabbed my arm. "Dr. Thompson," she whispered. "Wasn't he—" "Yes," I said quietly. "He died 3 years ago." The wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing across the ground. But these weren't normal dust devils. They moved in straight lines, following us like loyal pets. And in the distance, we could hear that flute music again. Closer now. We needed help. Real help. Diana mentioned a man named Joseph Begay, a Navajo elder who knew about these things. I made the call right there, trying to keep my voice steady as the dust devils circled closer. That's when Kimberly, the documentary filmmaker, came running up the path. "You all need to see this," she said, holding up her camera with trembling hands. "I was reviewing yesterday's footage and there's something in it, something that wasn't there when we were filming." On her small camera screen, I could see the footage from when we opened the vessel. Everything looked normal until she zoomed in on the background. There, standing in the shadows of the ruins, was a figure watching us, a figure wearing my face. The rising sun painted the cliffs blood red as we huddled around that tiny screen, watching in horror as my double turned to the camera and smiled, with far too many teeth. Joseph Begay arrived at sunrise. He was an older man with kind eyes and gray hair, wearing a denim jacket despite the heat. The moment he stepped out of his truck, he looked up at the cliffs and frowned. "You opened something," he said. It wasn't a question. Before we could answer, we heard Professor Wilson shouting again from inside the ruins. This time, he sounded scared. We found him in a new chamber the team had just uncovered. He was standing over something wrapped in ancient cloth, his hands shaking as he held his flashlight. "I found it," he kept saying. "I finally found it." The cloth bundle was human-shaped. My stomach turned when I realized what it was. A mummy. But this one was different from any I'd seen before. It wore a headdress made of animal skins, and its fingers ended in what looked like claws. "Don't touch it," Joseph said sharply, but Wilson was already reaching for the headdress. Kimberly raised her camera to film. Later, when we watched the footage, we all saw it. Just for a second, Wilson's face changed. His features melted like wax. becoming something else, something with too many eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. That's when the sand paintings appeared. None of us had noticed them forming. One minute the chamber floor was empty, the next it was covered in intricate patterns, made of colored sand. They showed people turning into animals, hunting scenes, things I didn't want to look at too closely. Diana gasped. "Those symbols," she whispered. "They're forbidden. No one's supposed to know them anymore." The dust in the air was getting thicker, making it hard to breathe. I reached for my heart medication, but when I opened the bottle, I froze. Instead of pills, it was full of tiny bones that crumbled to dust when I touched them. "It's playing. With us," Joseph said quietly. "Testing us. Learning our fears." Outside, the wind was picking up. We could hear it howling through the canyon, but this wasn't any normal wind. It sounded like voices calling our names. Professor Wilson started talking to himself again, having conversations with people who weren't there. But now, his words didn't make sense. He switched between English and languages I'd never heard before. "Look!" Kimberly pointed her camera at the chamber entrance. "There's someone out there." Through her camera screen, we could see figures standing in the darkness. They looked like us, perfect copies, but they were just watching, waiting. When we looked without the camera, there was nobody there. "The entity is getting stronger," Joseph explained, pulling something from his bag. It looked like dried herbs and sacred items. "It feeds on fear, on longing. It learns from us, becomes us. The ancient ones trapped it here long ago, but now—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. We all saw what happened next. A dust devil formed in the center of the chamber, but this one was different. As we watched, it took shape, human shape. First it looked like Wilson, then Diana, then me. Round and round it spun, wearing our faces, like masks. Then Professor Wilson stepped forward, reaching out to touch it. "Fascinating," he whispered. "Professor, don't," I started to say. But it was too late. The dust devil surged forward, wrapping around him like a cocoon. When it cleared, Wilson was gone. All that was left were his glasses on the floor, covered in red dust. From somewhere deep in the ruins, we heard laughter. It sounded like Wilson's voice, but wrong, like multiple voices speaking at once. Diana grabbed my arm. In the beam of our flashlights, we could see dusty footprints appearing on the walls and ceiling, walking in impossible directions. "It's free," Joseph said grimly, "and now it wants the rest of us." The lights flickered, and in the darkness, I felt something brush against my face, something that felt like sand, but moved like fingers. The next morning, I woke up to find a perfect outline of a person made of dust on my bedroom floor. It looked like a crime scene chalk outline, except this one was slowly moving like it was breathing. My phone rang. It was Diana. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice shaking. I woke up and found marks on my arms, like someone carved symbols into my skin while I slept. But they don't hurt, and they're fading already, like they were drawn in dust. Drove to the park faster than I should have. The sun was just coming up, but the sky looked wrong. Too red, like it was stained with rust. The air was thick with dust, even though there wasn't any wind. Kimberly met us at the visitor center, holding her camera like it was a shield. "You have to see what I recorded last night," she said. The footage showed all of us. Me, Diana, Joseph, even Professor Wilson before he disappeared, walking through the ruins at midnight. We were doing things we'd never done, saying things we'd never said, but none of us had been there last night. We all had proof we'd been home. "It's learning," Joseph said when we showed him. "Taking our shapes, our memories, making copies of us." That's when we heard screaming from the parking lot. A tourist family was pointing at the cliffs. Their teenage son was taking pictures with his phone. When we looked at his screen, we could see what was scaring them. Dozens of people standing along the cliff edges, watching. Each one looked exactly like someone from our team. But when we looked at the cliffs with our own eyes, Nobody was there. "Where's Kimberly?" Diana suddenly asked. We found her camera first, lying in the dust near the entrance to the ruins. The last thing it recorded was Kimberly walking toward something we couldn't see. She was smiling like she'd just won an award. Something she'd always dreamed about. Then the image turned to static, and when it cleared, we all watched in horror as Kimberly turned to the camera one last time. Her face began to crack like dry mud, her body crumbling into red dust that blew away in a wind we couldn't feel. Joseph started laying down lines of water in front of the ruin entrances. "It can't cross running water," he explained. "That's how they trapped it before. But with the drought," he didn't have to finish. "The springs were all dry now. We had no natural water to protect us. My heart was beating too fast. I needed my medication, but I was afraid to take it. What if the entity had changed these pills into dust, too?" Diana spent the afternoon in the park's library searching through old records. She found something in a restricted file, the story of how her own great-grandfather had helped trap the skinwalker the first time. "They used 2 vessels," she said, spreading out the old papers. "One to trap it and one to seal it. We only found the first one. The second must still be hidden somewhere. But before we could look for it, the lights went out." In the darkness, we heard Professor Wilson's voice calling from deep inside the ruins. Except it couldn't be Wilson. We'd seen him disappear. The voice was wrong, too, like 3 people talking. "At once. Come see what I've become," it called. "Come see what you'll all become." Red dust began pouring from the air vents like blood-colored snow. As it fell, it started forming shapes. People shapes. They looked like everyone the entity had taken. Wilson, Kimberly, and others we didn't recognize. They were all smiling. "With too many teeth." "The second vessel," Joseph said urgently. "It must be in the museum collection. If we can find it." A dust devil slammed against the windows, but this one had eyes. Dozens of them, all blinking at once. Diana grabbed my arm. "Run!" We ran through dark hallways as the dust pursued us, taking shapes that became more impossible with each second. I could feel my heart pounding dangerously in my chest. The entity knew about my heart condition. It was using it against me, making me run. Behind us, we could hear it laughing with all its stolen voices. We barely made it to the museum storage room, locking the heavy door behind us. But as we caught our breath in the darkness, we realized something terrible. We could hear breathing, and it wasn't coming from any of us. In the beam of our flashlights, the dust on the storage room floor was moving, coming together, taking shape. It had been waiting for us here all along. The dust was taking shape in front of us, but this time, it wasn't pretending to be human. What rose up from the floor was a nightmare, part person, part animal, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like hot coals. "The second vessel," Joseph whispered urgently. "Look for anything that matches the first one we found." Diana and I started searching the shelves while Joseph tried to hold the creature back with his sacred items. The entity hissed when he threw blessed water at it, but the water turned to steam before it could do much harm. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I knew I needed my medication, but there wasn't time. There, Diana pointed to a high shelf. A clay pot sat almost hidden behind other artifacts, covered in the same strange symbols as the first one. The entity saw it, too. It roared. A sound, like a dust storm and a mountain lion mixed together, and lunged for the shelf. I don't know how I moved so fast, but somehow I got there first. My fingers closed around the vessel just as the entity reached for it. We both fell, and the pot rolled across the floor. "Diana!" I shouted, kicking it toward her. She caught it and started reading the symbols carved into its side. It's the same, writing as my great-grandfather's journal. The vessel needs blood from his bloodline. My blood to work. The entity was changing shapes faster now, flickering between forms like a broken movie. Professor Wilson, Kimberly, animals, monsters, things I can't describe. It knocked Joseph aside and went straight for Diana. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw myself at it. It felt like jumping into a sandstorm. Red dust filled my eyes and mouth. I could feel it trying to get inside me, trying to turn me into dust, too. My chest felt like it was being crushed, but I'd given Diana the time she needed. She pressed her bleeding palm against the vessel's cymbals, and they began to glow with a soft blue light. Joseph started chanting in his native language, his voice growing stronger with each word. The entity screamed. It dropped me and tried to escape, but something was pulling it back, like a vacuum cleaner sucking up dust. It clawed at the walls, leaving deep scratches in the concrete. That's when we heard the rumble. "The dam!" Diana shouted. "The emergency! Release! The water's coming!" The entity heard it too. For the first time, I saw fear in its glowing eyes. It knew it was trapped. Running water coming from one side, the vessel pulling it from the other. My heart felt like it was about to explode. Looking down at my hands, I could see they were starting to turn to dust. The entity had gotten inside. Me, after all. I knew what I had to do. "Diana," I said, my voice already sounding like sand shifting. "Finish the ritual." "But Mr. Talbot, do it." I used the last of my strength to tackle the entity, wrapping my arms around its shifting form. As Diana spoke the final words, as the water rushed through the canyon outside, I felt myself being pulled into the vessel along with the creature. The last thing I heard was Diana crying, Joseph finishing the sealing prayer, and the entity's scream of rage. The last thing I saw was dawn breaking over Mesa Verde, painting the cliffs the color of blood. The last thing I felt was peace, knowing the ancient evil was trapped again. And then everything was darkness and dust. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because in that final moment, I understood something. The entity had learned to copy us so well that it took on our weaknesses, and it had copied my heart. My very human heart that, despite its problems, knew how to sacrifice everything to protect others. That was its final mistake. As my consciousness faded into the sealed vessel, I heard the first birds returning to Mesa Verde. They were singing again. 3 months later, Diana stood at the entrance of Mesa Verde National Park, watching a storm roll in across the canyon. Real rain clouds, not dust storms. The drought had finally broken the day after they sealed the entity. She was the head ranger now. The official report said Richard Talbot died of a heart attack while protecting ancient artifacts during a severe dust storm. Professor Wilson and Kimberly were listed as missing, presumed lost in the same storm. Only Diana, Joseph, and a handful of others knew the truth. The sealed vessel was back with Joseph's people, protected by ancient prayers and modern security systems. Diana visited it sometimes, though Joseph warned her not to get too close. She couldn't help it, though. Sometimes when she stood near it, she could almost hear Talbot's voice in the whisper of sand against clay. The tourists were back, too. The park had been closed for emergency repairs after everything happened. But now families walk the paths again, taking pictures and pointing at the ancient cliff dwellings. "Miss Ranger!" A little girl tugged at Diana's sleeve. "I saw something weird in my camera." Diana knelt down to look at the girl's phone. The photo showed the usual view of the ruins, but in one of the windows there was a shape that looked like a man watching the crowds below. "That's just a shadow," Diana said gently, even as she recognized Talbot's profile. "The light plays tricks out here sometimes." The girl nodded and ran back to her parents. Diana touched the protection symbols Joseph had carved into her ranger badge, just in case. Later that evening, as she locked up the visitor center, she noticed something that made her pause. There were footprints in the dust on her desk. Not regular footprints. These started on the floor, walked up the wall and across the ceiling. But instead of feeling scared, Diana smiled a little. The footprints weren't the scary kind, like before. These were protective, like someone making their rounds, checking to make sure everything was safe. She took out her grandmother's old notebook, where she'd been writing down everything she could remember about the old stories. There was so much to learn, so much to protect. "Good night, Mr. Talbot," she whispered to the empty room. And just for a moment, in the last ray of sunlight through the window, the dust motes swirled in a way that looked like a friendly wave goodbye. The birds sang softly in the twilight, and somewhere deep in the canyon, an ancient flute played a peaceful melody on the wind. Mesa Verde kept its secrets, and now Diana would keep them too. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, visitors say they see a ranger walking the cliff edges, checking on the ruins. He looks solid from far away, they say, but up close, he's made of red dust and starlight, forever protecting the places where past and present meet, where some doors are better left closed, and where ancient powers sleep in clay vessels, dreaming of the day they might rise again. But that's just a story, isn't it?